Leonard von Greystone's eyes snapped open to the intricate patterns of a velvet canopy above him. For a moment, the world swam, a dizzying clash of memories flooding his consciousness like a dam breaking. Leo, a software engineer from a world of concrete and code, drowning in the arrogance and courtly intrigues of a duke named Leonard. The last thing he remembered was falling asleep at his desk after another marathon gaming session, the glow of his monitor the final light of a life now gone. He sat up abruptly, silk sheets pooling around his waist. The room was vast, with walls of dark polished wood and tapestries depicting hunting scenes in gold thread. Morning light filtered through leaded glass windows, casting diamond-shaped patterns across a marble floor. His heart hammered against his ribs, a frantic drumbeat echoing the panic rising in his throat. 3 months. The knowledge settled in his gut like cold iron. In 3 months, he would be executed after a public humiliation by the hero Kale, his head separated from his body while the nobility watched with indifferent eyes. He swung his legs over the side of the bed, his feet sinking into a plush rug woven with the Greystone crest, a stylized mountain peak against a stormy sky. The body he now inhabited felt alien yet familiar, muscles toned from years of privileged living, hands smooth and unmarked by labor. Stumbling toward an ornate full-length mirror framed in gilded oak, he gripped its edges, knuckles white. The reflection showed a man in his late 20s, with sharp aristocratic features, silver blonde hair swept back from a high forehead, and eyes the color of winter frost. Arrogance was etched into every line of that face, a lifetime of entitlement now overlain with Leo's raw terror. Whispers echoed in his mind, fragments of court gossip, veiled threats from rivals, the sneering tone of servants who knew his fate. He remembered a grand ball where he'd insulted a minor baron's daughter, a trade deal gone sour with Duke Forlak's faction, the growing rumors of his incompetence. The original Leonard had been a fool, blind to the traps closing around him. Leo pressed his forehead against the cool glass, breathing ragged. I need a cheat, he thought desperately. In every story like this, there's always a cheat. His eyes darted around the chamber, searching for anything that might offer salvation. Then he saw it, tucked into an alcove near the fireplace, a pedestal of black obsidian carved with swirling runes that seemed to drink the light. The Fate-Gacha altar. He approached it slowly, the runes glowing faintly as he drew near. A translucent interface flickered into existence above the pedestal, displaying elegant script in a language he somehow understood. Welcome, Leonard von Greystone. Draw your fate with life force. Below, a counter showed his remaining life force, 100 units, pulsing with a soft golden light. The system explained in cold, clinical terms, each pull cost life force, with higher tiers requiring more. Talents, skills, weapons, destinies, all determined by chance. But there was no mention of pity counters or divine interventions. With trembling hands, he reached out, focusing a thread of his life force as the memories instructed. 5 units drained away, the golden light dimming slightly. The interface shimmered, runes spinning in a dizzying whirl before resolving into a rock. A plain, gray river stone about the size of his fist materialized on the pedestal with a dull thud. Leo stared at it, disbelief curdling into despair. He tried again, another 5 units vanishing. This time, a wilted weed appeared, its leaves brown and brittle. A third pull, 5 more units, yielded a cracked wooden spoon, handle splintered as if chewed by rats. His luck wasn't just bad, it was cosmically cursed. Each failure felt like a physical blow, the interface flickering erratically as if struggling to process the absurdity. On the 4th attempt, he poured 10 units into the pull, desperation overriding caution. The runes flared blindingly bright, then shattered into fragments of light. The interface glitched, static-like distortions crawling across its surface, numbers and symbols bleeding into nonsense. A low hum built in the air, vibrating through the floorboards. With a sound like breaking glass, the interface crashed entirely, dissolving into motes of fading light. For a moment, there was only silence, broken by Leo's harsh breathing. Then new text scrawled across the empty air in crimson letters, jagged and urgent. Anomaly detected. Catastrophic failure threshold exceeded. Activating Pity Breaker's Gambit. The words hung there, ominous and incomprehensible. Beneath them, a hidden counter he hadn't seen before flickered into view, a global pity counter, its numbers spinning wildly before settling. Divine intervention triggered. Reward, divine insight. A surge of energy, cold and sharp as ice, shot through him. Knowledge flooded his mind, not as memories, but as fundamental truths etched into his soul. He saw the Fate-Gacha system's inner workings, how it balanced probabilities across the world, how it harvested life force to maintain itself, how a hidden global pity counter existed to correct extreme imbalances. And he understood his curse. His luck was so abysmally bad that any pull, no matter how minor, would guarantee catastrophic failure. But that failure would violate reality itself, forcing the pity counter to activate after just one terrible draw, granting a divine intervention tier reward to restore balance. The cost? Minimal life force, just enough to initiate the pull. The trade-off? He could never get anything ordinary again, only worthless trash or world-shaking powers, with no in-between. He sank to his knees, the marble cold through his thin nightclothes. Divine insight unfolded further, revealing snippets. The system guardians, ancient entities that maintained the balance, would view his curse as a flaw. Duke Forlak's enforcers were already monitoring anomalies. His life force was dwindling, now at 80 units after the draws. He had to be strategic, to use this curse deliberately, to turn absolute failure into survival. A hysterical laugh bubbled in his throat. All those hours spent optimizing gacha pulls and games, and now he was stuck with the worst luck in existence, weaponized into a cheat. As he processed this, the heavy oak door to his chambers burst open. A servant in Greystone livery, a young man with nervous eyes and a thin face, stumbled in, bowing hastily. "Your Grace, forgive the intrusion," he stammered, wringing his hands. "A messenger has arrived. The hero Kale and his party are at the gates. They request an audience and a friendly duel tomorrow at dawn in the training grounds. They say it's to honor your family's martial traditions." The words hung in the air, sharp as a blade. Leo felt the blood drain from his face. This was it, the first step toward his canonical humiliation. In the original plot, Leonard had accepted eagerly, only to be disarmed and mocked before the entire household, his reputation crumbling further. He looked at the servant, whose name he dredged from Leonard's memories, Jasper, a junior attendant assigned to his wing. The man's expression was a mix of fear and pity, as if he already saw the executioner's axe. "Tell them I need time to prepare," Leo managed, his voice steadier than he felt. Jasper bowed again and scurried out, leaving the door ajar. Alone once more, Leo stared at the Fate-Gacha altar, the rock and wheat and broken spoon still sitting there like taunts. Divine insight whispered in the back of his mind, outlining possibilities. He had one day. One day to use his curse draws, to summon something, anything, that might change tomorrow's outcome. His hands clenched into fists. Survival was no longer an abstract concept, it was a duel at dawn, with a hero who held his fate in his hands. And somewhere beyond, the system guardians watched, their attention turning toward the anomaly in Greystone Manor. Dawn painted the training grounds of Greystone Manor in pale gold and long shadows. Leonard stood at the center of the packed dirt circle, the morning chill seeping through his fine linen dueling tunic. Around him, a semicircle of nobles had gathered, their silks and velvets a riot of color against the gray stone walls. Their murmurs were a low, buzzing hive of anticipation. He could feel their eyes on him, some curious, most gleeful, all waiting for the spectacle of Duke von Greystone's inevitable fall. Across from him, Kale stood with an easy, practiced grace. The hero wore simple but well-made leathers, a long sword resting casually against his shoulder. He was younger than Leonard had imagined from the fragmented memories, perhaps early 20s, with sun-bleached hair and eyes the color of a summer sky. There was a relaxed confidence in his posture, a smirk playing on his lips that didn't reach his eyes. Those eyes held a cold, assessing clarity. This wasn't a friendly duel. It was a public execution of reputation, the first canonical step toward Leonard's physical end in 3 months. "Nervous, Your Grace." Kale's voice carried easily over the murmuring crowd. It was light, almost conversational, but the edge was unmistakable. "I've heard tales of your prowess. I must admit, I'm eager to see if the stories do you justice." A ripple of suppressed laughter moved through the spectators. Leonard's borrowed memory supplied the context. His previous self had been loud, brash, and profoundly unskilled with a blade, buying his way through training with coin and title. The original Leonard would have puffed up with indignation at the slight. The man inside that body now felt only a cold, squeezing dread in his gut, counterpoint by the frantic calculation of a mind used to spreadsheet risks, not steel. He said nothing, merely adjusting his grip on the practiced longsword provided by the manor arms master. It felt alien and heavy in his hands. The divine insight skill, humming softly at the edge of his perception like a persistent whisper, offered no combat data. It only reaffirmed the brutal math: his physical stats were mediocre, his sword skill non-existent. Kale's aura, visible to the skill as a gentle, steady glow, spoke of disciplined training and a solid, foundational talent granted by the Fate-Gacha, nothing divine, but more than enough. Very well, Kale said, his smirk widening as he interpreted the silence as fear. He saluted with his blade, a crisp, efficient motion. Let us begin. There was no fanfare. Kale moved. It was not a blinding speed, but it was horrifyingly efficient. He closed the distance in 3 quick strides, his sword lancing out in a straight thrust aimed at Leonard's center mass. It was a basic attack, almost an insult in its simplicity, designed to test and overwhelm a novice. Leonard's body, operating on panic and muscle memory that wasn't his own, managed a clumsy parry. The impact shuddered up his arm, numbing his fingers. He stumbled back, boots scuffing the dirt. The crowd's murmur rose in pitch. Kale didn't press immediately. He circled, his movements fluid. Come now, Your Grace. Show me something worthy of your station. Another attack, a low slash at the legs. Leonard jumped back, barely avoiding it, his balance precarious. He was breathing hard already, sweat beading on his brow despite the chill. Each of Kale's movements was measured, controlled, holding back vast reserves of skill. He was playing with him. Dragging out the humiliation. The weight of the original plot felt like a physical chain, pulling him toward the dirt, toward the moment where Kale would disarm him with a flick of the wrist and place a boot on his chest before the entire court. Think, damn it, Leonard's mind screamed. A straight fight was suicide. His only weapon wasn't in his hands. It was the cursed paradox in his soul. As Kale fainted high and swept low again, Leonard let his parry be knocked wide, deliberately leaving his right side open. At the same moment, he focused inward, on the strange, hollow space where his connection to the Fate-Gacha resided. He didn't need an altar here. The system was part of the world's fabric. A pull was a matter of will and sacrifice. He channeled a sliver of his life force, just 5 units, the minimum he dared. He couldn't afford a major drain, he was already down to 80 from yesterday's disastrous experiments. He didn't want a weapon. He needed a miracle, and his curse promised one, but only after a spectacular failure. The mental command was a desperate, silent shout, pull. The world didn't freeze, but for Leonard, it stuttered. A familiar, nauseating wrench twisted in his core as the life force left him. Before his mind's eye, a phantom interface flickered, glitched, and displayed not a divine icon, but a single, pathetic image, a small, cracked hourglass, its sand frozen in clumps. The text beside it shimmered erratically, failed temporal sands, inert. It was trash. Utter, worthless trash. Exactly what he needed. The system recoiled. He felt it, a shudder in the air that no one else perceived. The hidden global pity counter, strained by the cosmic wrongness of his luck, triggered. The cracked hourglass icon shattered in his mental vision. In its place, a pulse of brilliant, silver-white light erupted, solidifying into a new, intricate symbol, a stylized clock face with a single hand poised between ticks. Knowledge flooded into him, immediate and instinctual. Divine intervention, temporal stutter acquired. The skill required a minor, continuous drain of life force to activate, 1 unit per second of use. It could briefly freeze the flow of time in a small radius around his body. Not stop the world, but create a pocket of slowed, granular reality where he alone could move at normal speed. All this passed in less than a heartbeat of real time. Kale, seeing his opponent falter and his eyes lose focus, chose that moment to end the farce. His expression shifted from amused contempt to cold finality. He stepped in, his practiced sword blurring into a perfect, unhurried combination, a beat against Leonard's weakened guard, a twist to disarm, and a final, thrusting lunge aimed squarely at Leonard's heart, a killing blow in all but name, meant to stop a hair's breadth from his chest. This ends now, Kale stated, his voice flat. Now, Leonard thought, and activated temporal stutter. The world didn't go monochrome, but it thickened. The sound of the crowd dulled into a deep, drawn-out groan. The morning light seemed to congeal. Kale's form, mid-lunge, became a statue of amber, his sword inching forward with impossible slowness, his face a mask of deterministic triumph. Around Leonard, dust motes hung suspended in the air like frozen stars. He could feel his life force ticking down, 79. 78. It was a costly trick, but he had no choice. He couldn't move fast himself, his body was still clumsy, but in this gelid reality, he didn't need to be fast. He simply had to be. He took a heavy, stumbling step to the side, out of the line of the thrust. The air resisted like syrup. He brought his own practice sword around in a slow, awkward arc. He aimed not for Kale, who was inviolable in his slowed time, but for the hero's blade. With a grunt of effort, he tapped the flat of Kale's practice sword, pushing it just wide enough to miss his body entirely. A second passed. His life force dropped to 77. He released the skill. Time snapped back with a silent, violent rush. To the crowd, it happened in a blink. One moment, Kale was executing a flawless, finishing thrust. The next, Leonard was somehow 3 feet to the left, having seemingly teleported, and Kale's sword was slicing through empty air where Leonard's heart should have been. Leonard's own blade, following through on its clumsy swing, connected with a solid thwack against Kale's exposed upper arm. It wasn't a powerful blow. It wouldn't bruise. But it landed. The gasps from the nobles were sharp, collective. The gleeful murmuring died instantly, replaced by stunned silence. Kale recovered his balance with preternatural speed, whirling to face Leonard, his sky-blue eyes wide with pure, unadulterated shock. The cold confidence was shattered, replaced by bewilderment and a dawning, hot anger. He looked at his arm, then at Leonard, as if seeing a ghost. Leonard stood panting, his sword held in a trembling guard. The after-effects of the temporal stutter left a metallic taste in his mouth and a hollow ache in his chest where the life force had been burned. He had 77 units left. How? Kale breathed, the word barely audible. Leonard said nothing. He just met Kale's gaze, letting the silence and the impossible dodge speak for itself. He hadn't won. He'd been battered and was exhausted. Kale was completely unharmed, save for his wounded pride. But the total, canonical humiliation had been averted. The script had been torn, if only for a page. After a long, tense moment, Kale's expression hardened. The anger was banked, controlled, but it burned brighter beneath the surface. He gave a stiff, minimal bow. It seems the stories were incomplete, Your Grace. A surprising maneuver. The compliment was ice. He turned on his heel and strode from the training grounds without another word, the crowd parting silently before him. The nobles began to disperse, their conversations now hushed and speculative, shooting glances back at the disheveled duke standing alone in the circle. Leonard finally let his sword tip drop to the dirt, his shoulders slumping with fatigue that was more spiritual than physical. He had survived the first trap. He had used his curse as a weapon. The thrill of it was immediately smothered by the cold reality of the cost, precious life force spent, and a dangerous amount of attention drawn. As the last of the spectators filtered out through the arched gate, a figure detached itself from the deep shadow of the armory wall. Leonard hadn't noticed him before. The man was of average height, dressed in unremarkable grey robes that seemed to drink the light. His face was narrow, pale, and utterly forgettable, save for his eyes. They were the color of tarnished silver, and they held a keen, intelligent light that missed nothing. He approached Leonard with silent steps, stopping a respectful distance away. His voice, when he spoke, was a soft, dry rustle, like pages turning. A most unconventional display, Duke Greystone. To fail so utterly, only to snatch a draw from the jaws of disgrace at the last conceivable moment. It defies probability. Leonard straightened, wariness flooding him. Who are you? A humble observer with an interest in anomalies, the man said, his lips quirking in a smile that didn't touch his tarnished silver eyes. The way you moved, it was as if the world hesitated for you alone. A fascinating trick. One that must come at a price. He took a half-step closer, his voice dropping even further. There are those in the capital, in the higher courts, who would pay a great deal to understand such fluctuations in fortune. Or to direct them. Your position is precarious, Duke. Your family's influence wanes. You have 3 months, by all accounts. Perhaps less, now that you've piqued certain interests. He let the words hang in the cool morning air. I represent a consortium. We have resources. Information. Protection from the more direct methods of your enemies. We could make the path to your continued survival less fraught. All we ask in return is the occasional consultation. A chance to study your unique relationship with chance itself. Think of it not as servitude, but as a mutually beneficial partnership. The man extended a hand, not to shake, but palm up, as if offering an invisible bargain. The world runs on the gotcha's will, but even wills can be greased. Or jammed. Consider my offer. I will find you again when you have need. And you will have need, Leonard von Greystone. Very soon. With that, the man in grey robes melted back into the shadows of the armory and was gone, leaving Leonard alone in the silent training grounds, the echo of the duel and the unsettling proposal hanging heavy in the dawn air. The council chamber smelled of polished oak and ambition. Leonard sat at the edge of the long table, the weight of his ducal circlet pressing against his temples like a reminder of the executioner's blade still hanging over him. 3 months. The number echoed in his mind as he watched the other dukes exchange pleasantries that were anything but pleasant. Duke Forlac sat directly across from him, his military uniform immaculate, medals glinting in the torchlight. The man hadn't looked at Leonard once since the meeting began, which somehow felt more dangerous than open hostility. Forlac's fingers tapped a slow rhythm on the table, the sound of a predator waiting. "And so, Duke Alaric of the Western Marches was saying, his voice dripping with false concern, we must consider the stability of our realm. Some of us have demonstrated vulnerabilities." All eyes shifted to Leonard. He felt the heat crawl up his neck. The duel with Kale had been yesterday, but already the rumors had spread through the capital's gossip mills like wildfire. He hadn't been humiliated, thanks to temporal stutter, but he hadn't won either. In the eyes of these wolves, a draw was as good as defeat. "Your performance against that common-born hero was most instructive," Duke Alara purred from his left. Her smile didn't reach her cold blue eyes. "One might wonder if the Greystone line has grown, diluted." Leonard kept his face neutral, but his mind raced. Divine insight whispered in the back of his consciousness, analyzing their words, their micro-expressions. They weren't just mocking him, they were testing. Probing for weakness. And he had so much weakness to give. Life force, 77 units. The number burned in his awareness. Every pull from the Fate-Gacha cost him pieces of his very existence. He'd used 3 units yesterday just to avoid being publicly beaten. Now these vultures smelled blood in the water. "Which brings us to the matter of the tax levy," Forlac finally spoke, his voice like gravel grinding against stone. He still didn't look at Leonard. "The northern provinces have enjoyed generous exemptions for too long. The crown requires funds for border defenses. Effective immediately, all northern duchies will contribute an additional 20%. Leonard's stomach dropped. 20%. Greystone lands were already struggling. The original Leonard had been more interested in parties and duels than estate management. The memories that weren't his own confirmed it, empty granaries, neglected infrastructure, peasants barely scraping by. "My lands cannot sustain such an increase," Leonard said, keeping his voice steady. "The harvest was poor this year." "Then perhaps you should have considered that before embarrassing yourself before the entire court," Duke Alaric said, not bothering to hide his smirk. "The levy stands. Payment due in 30 days. The meeting dissolved into discussions of troop movements and trade agreements, topics from which Leonard was pointedly excluded. He sat there, feeling the walls closing in. 30 days. He needed gold, and he needed it fast. And he had exactly one way to get it. The capital's black market wasn't in some shadowy alley as Leonard had expected. It occupied an entire district, the Sinking Quarter, so named because the buildings seemed to lean toward the muddy streets as if bowing under the weight of their secrets. The air here was thick with the scent of damp stone, exotic spices, and something darker that tickled the back of his throat. Leonard moved through the crowded streets, his fine ducal robes drawing glances that ranged from curious to openly hostile. He'd come alone, dismissing his guards at the district's edge. What he planned to do required privacy. Stalls lined both sides of the narrow street, their wares displayed with a casual disregard for legality. Caged creatures with too many eyes chittered in iron bars. Glowing crystals pulsed with stolen magic. Weapons that looked like they'd seen too much blood lay on stained velvet. "Looking for something specific, milord?" a merchant asked, his teeth yellowed and his eyes calculating. "I've got elixirs that'll make you forget your troubles. Or remember someone else's." Leonard shook his head and kept walking. He needed a quiet spot. Somewhere he could use the Fate-Gacha without drawing attention. He found it in a dead-end courtyard behind a tavern called the Rusty Anchor. The space was empty save for a broken fountain and the skeletal remains of what might have been a market stall. Perfect. Closing his eyes, Leonard reached inward. The Fate-Gacha interface shimmered into existence in his mind's eye, a complex lattice of glowing lines and shifting symbols that still made his head ache to look at. Last time he'd used it mid-duel, nearly getting killed in the process. This time would be different. Controlled. Strategic. Or so he told himself. He focused on his intent, rare trade goods. Items of value he could sell quickly. The system seemed to understand, the symbols shifting to reflect his desire. The cost glowed ominously, 10 units of life force. More than he'd spent on temporal stutter. His current total of 77 units blinked in the corner of his awareness. 10 units. A tenth of his remaining life. The original Leonard would have balked. But the man from another world, Leo, buried beneath ducal robes and impending execution, did the math. Without gold, he couldn't pay the tax. Without paying the tax, his enemies would have legal grounds to seize his lands. Without lands, he was a duke in name only, and an easier target than ever. He committed the life force. The pull began. The familiar sensation of something vital being siphoned from his core. His breath hitched. Colors swirled behind his eyelids, not the glorious rainbow of a lucky draw, but the sickly greens and browns of failure. He could feel it already. The cosmic curse that was his cheat and his burden. The result materialized in his hands with a pathetic plop. A lump of what appeared to be petrified dung. Leonard stared at it. Really? The system's idea of rare trade goods was fossilized waste. He almost laughed, but the laughter died in his throat as the interface began to glitch. Lines of light fractured. Symbols inverted and bled into each other. A low hum built in his skull, growing to a painful whine. The courtyard around him seemed to warp, the broken fountain's water flowed upward for a heartbeat, the shadows stretched in impossible directions. Pity Breaker's Gambit. Triggered. The global pity counter, that hidden mechanism the divine insight had revealed, activated. Reality itself protested as the system scrambled to correct the catastrophic failure. A weight settled in the air, thick and electric. The hair on Leonard's arm stood up. New knowledge flooded his mind. Not a physical item this time, but a skill. Alchemist's Fortune. Temporary boost to item appraisal and value recognition. Duration, 1 hour. Activation cost, 5 life force units. Leonard exhaled, his knees suddenly weak. He leaned against the crumbling courtyard wall, the petrified dung still in his hand. Life force now, 67 units. He'd spent 15 in less than a minute. The fatigue hit him like a physical blow, a deep, bone-aching weariness that made his vision swim. But he had what he needed. Or at least, the tool to get it. Activating Alchemist's Fortune cost another 5 units, dropping him to 62. The world sharpened. Colors became more vivid. The sounds of the black market beyond the courtyard resolved into individual conversations, the clink of coins, the rustle of illicit goods. He returned to the main street, and now he saw what he hadn't before. The merchant with the yellow teeth, his elixirs glowed with a faint, sickly aura to Leonard's enhanced sight. Counterfeit. Worthless. But next to them, a seemingly ordinary clay pot pulsed with a soft golden light. Leonard approached. That pot, he said, trying to sound casually interested. Where's it from? The merchant's eyes narrowed. Just a cooking pot. My wife made it. Not for sale. 50 silver, Leonard said. The merchant blinked. It's not. A gold crown, Leonard cut him off. He could see the truth now. The pot wasn't clay at all, but fired earth from the sacred groves, a material that retained purification properties. To the right buyer, a temple, perhaps, it would be worth 20 gold crowns at least. The merchant's greed warred with his confusion. He took the gold coin Leonard offered, his fingers closing around it like a trap. Pleasure doing business, my lord. Leonard moved on. An hour. He had an hour. He found a dagger in another stall, its blade nicked and rusty. But to his enhanced sight, the hilt glimmered with embedded star metal fragments, rare, volatile, and incredibly valuable to enchanters. He bought it for 3 silver. Worth at least 15 gold. A tapestry in a third stall, depicting a boring pastoral scene. But the threads were woven with moon silk, invisible to normal sight. 50 silver. Worth 10 gold. He moved through the market like a ghost, seeing value where others saw junk. The alchemist's fortune guided him, a whisper in his mind that said, there, and not there, and that's the one. By the time the skill began to fade, his purse was lighter by 5 gold crowns, but he carried a satchel containing what he knew to be at least 50 gold crowns worth of undervalued artifacts. Enough to cover the first installment of the tax. Enough to buy time. The fatigue deepened as the skill expired. 62 units of life force remained. He felt hollowed out, as if part of him had been carved away and sold along with the artifacts. He found a reputable-looking appraiser, a woman with sharp eyes and no questions, and sold the lot for 48 gold crowns after her commission. Less than he'd estimated, but still enough. The coins felt heavy in his purse. A temporary reprieve. He'd bought himself 30 days. But the cost? As he left the appraiser's shop, the weight of his depleted life force dragged at every step. The market crowd seemed louder, brighter, more overwhelming. He needed to get back to the manor. To rest. To plan his next move. That's when he saw them. Kale stood at the entrance to the market district, his hero's party arrayed around him. There were 4 of them, a woman in leather armor with twin short swords, a man in robes holding a staff that glowed faintly, another man with a bow slung across his back, and Kale himself, his hand resting on the pommel of his sword. Their eyes met across the crowded street. Kale's expression didn't change, but something shifted in his posture. Recognition. Calculation. The woman with the short swords followed his gaze, her hand drifting toward her weapon. Leonard froze. The fatigue vanished under a surge of adrenaline. He was alone. Exhausted. Carrying a small fortune in gold. And the hero who was supposed to humiliate and eventually help execute him was staring right at him. For a long moment, neither moved. The noise of the market faded to a distant buzz. Leonard's fingers twitched toward where his own sword would normally hang. He'd left it at the manor. A mistake. Then Kale gave a slow, deliberate nod. Not friendly. Not hostile. Acknowledgement. A promise that this wasn't over. He turned and led his party deeper into the market, disappearing into the crowd. Leonard stood there, the coins in his purse suddenly feeling like stones. He'd survived the council. He'd secured the funds. But he'd drawn more attention. And in this world, attention was just another word for target. The walk back to Greystone Manor felt infinitely longer than the walk there. The heavy oak door of Leonard's study closed with a soft thud that seemed to swallow the sounds of the manor beyond. Dust motes danced in the slanted afternoon light that cut through the leaded glass windows, illuminating the chaos of parchment and leather-bound volumes spread across the massive mahogany desk. Leonard leaned back in his chair, the worn velvet upholstery groaning under his weight. His fingers traced the embossed cover of the oldest tome he'd acquired from the black market, a book bound in what appeared to be dragon hide, its pages yellowed with centuries. He'd spent the last 3 hours cross-referencing the cryptic texts, his divine insight skill humming at the edge of his consciousness like a persistent headache. The skill didn't grant instant knowledge, but rather highlighted passages that resonated with the Fate-Gacha system's underlying rules. It was tedious work, requiring him to pore over each line while maintaining the skill's activation, a constant drain of focus that left his temples throbbing. System guardians, the text called them. Not gods, not demons, but something older. Entities woven into the fabric of reality itself, maintaining the balance of the Fate-Gacha. Leonard's eyes narrowed as he read a passage written in a hand so precise it looked machine-printed. When anomalies disrupt the ordained flow, the guardians enact correction. The system tolerates variance, but not violation. Violation. The word echoed in his mind. His pity breaker's gambit wasn't just bad luck, it was a cosmic error. A glitch in reality that forced the system to compensate with divine intervention rewards. He thought of the temporal stutter skill freezing time, the alchemist's fortune revealing hidden value in worthless artifacts. Each time he triggered the pity counter, he'd felt a subtle shift in the air, a momentary pressure against his senses he'd dismissed as fatigue. Now he understood. Those were the guardians noticing. Leonard pushed the book away, standing to pace the length of the study. The room smelled of old paper, beeswax polish, and the faint metallic tang of the Fate-Gacha altar in the corner, a circular stone platform etched with silver runes that glowed with a sickly light. His remaining life force stood at 62 units. A dangerous number. The tax levy demanded payment in 27 days, and he had only 48 gold crowns to show for his black market efforts. Not nearly enough. But more pressing was the knowledge gnawing at him. If the guardians saw his curse as a flaw to be corrected, what did correction mean? Erasure? Imprisonment? Something worse than execution. He stopped before the altar, the runes pulsing in time with his heartbeat. The divine insight skill whispered possibilities. He could learn more. Understand the guardian's nature. Their weaknesses. But to do that, he'd need to draw from the system directly, target knowledge about its maintainers. A high-risk pull that could attract exactly the attention he feared. Leonard's hands trembled slightly as he placed them on the cold stone. The decision warred within him. Caution screamed to wait, to gather more resources, to avoid provoking entities that could snuff him out like a candle. But curiosity, the same drive that had made him a researcher in his previous life, pulled harder. Knowledge was power. And power was survival. 5 units, he whispered to himself. A manageable sacrifice. Enough to trigger a meaningful pull without crippling himself. He focused his intent, show me the Guardians. Their nature. Their purpose. The runes flared, burning silver-white. Life force drained from him in a cold rush that left him gasping, his vision swimming. The altar hummed, vibrations traveling up through the stone floor into his bones. Then, nothing. No flash of light. No materializing object. Just a small, gray pebble that clattered onto the altar with an insultingly mundane sound. Failed communion stone, the system interface flickered in his mind before dissolving into static. Worthless trash. Exactly as expected. But then the world fractured. It wasn't pain so much as dislocation. Leonard felt himself torn from his study, from his body, from time itself. Colors bled into a swirling vortex of impossible geometries. He was falling through layers of reality, each one peeling back to reveal deeper truths beneath. The pity counter activated. Divine intervention, echoes of the ancients. Vision slammed into him with the force of a physical blow. He saw, no, he experienced, the birth of the Fate-Gacha system. Not creation, but imposition. Vast, formless entities weaving threads of destiny into a lattice that spanned continents, embedding themselves into the world's fundamental laws. They were not benevolent. Not malevolent. They were, maintenance. Reality gardeners pruning anomalies to preserve the design. He saw flashes of others who had stumbled upon system flaws. A woman whose draws always produced duplicates, creating infinite copies of herself until she dissolved into statistical noise. A man who could predict pull outcomes, his foresight making the system deterministic, until the Guardians rewrote his memories, leaving him a drooling simpleton. Correction. Always correction. Then the vision turned to him. Leonard saw himself from the Guardian's perspective, a flickering anomaly in the data stream. His pity breaker's gambit appeared as a jagged crack in the system's smooth operation, forcing compensatory mechanisms that strained the underlying code. The Guardian's attention focused on that crack. He felt their scrutiny like ice water poured down his spine. They were analyzing him. Calculating the risk. Determining whether correction was necessary or if his anomaly could be repurposed. New knowledge flooded his mind. The Guardians operated through intermediaries, the system Guardians mentioned in the texts. Lesser entities that served as their eyes and hands in the mortal realm. They watched for fluctuations. For pulls that defied probability. For curses like his. And they were already watching. The vision showed him moments from the past 3 days. The duel with Kale, a spike in temporal manipulation that registered on their sensors. The black market pull, an economic anomaly that drew statistical attention. Each use of his skills left faint traces in the system's log files, accumulating like breadcrumbs leading straight to his door. The strain of maintaining the vision became agony. Life force drained at an alarming rate, 10 units, 15, 20. Leonard tried to pull back, to sever the connection, but the echoes of the ancients held him in its grip, forcing him to witness one final revelation. A chamber of crystal and light. 3 figures shrouded in shifting veils of probability. The system Guardians in their true form. One turned her attention toward the vision, toward him. Eyes that contained entire galaxies focused on his soul. Anomaly confirmed, a voice spoke directly into his mind, bypassing ears entirely. It sounded like mathematics given sound. Pity breaker designation, Leonard von Greystone. Threat assessment, moderate. Correction protocol, observation pending active intervention. Then the warning, delivered not as words but as conceptual understanding burned into his consciousness, the Watchers are coming. The vision shattered. Leonard collapsed to his knees on the study's Persian rug, gasping for air that felt too thin, too cold. Sweat soaked through his silk shirt. His hands shook violently as he checked his life force. 32 units. He'd burned 30 in that single vision. Nearly half his remaining reserves gone in minutes. But the knowledge. The knowledge was worth it. He now understood the true scale of the game he was playing. This wasn't just about surviving nobles and execution dates. This was about existing in a reality that had built-in error correction, and he was the error. He forced himself to stand, using the desk for support. The study looked different now. The shadows in the corners seemed deeper, more intentional. The air held a new tension, as if the room itself was holding its breath. Then the door creaked open. Not the slow groan of old hinges, but the deliberate sound of someone entering without knocking. Leonard's head snapped up, his temporal stutter skill priming itself instinctively, another life force drain he couldn't afford. A hooded figure stood in the doorway, silhouetted against the torchlight of the hallway beyond. The intruder was tall, slender, wrapped in dark cloth that absorbed light rather than reflected it. No livery. No noble crest. Just shadows and silence. Leonard's mind raced. Assassin? Spy? One of Forlax's agents? Or something worse, a watcher already here to enact correction. The figure took a step forward, the movement unnaturally smooth. Floorboards didn't creak. Dust didn't stir. It was as if reality bent slightly around them, accommodating their presence. Duke Greystone, a voice said from within the hood. Genderless. Toneless. We need to discuss your condition. Leonard's hand drifted toward the aegis of the unworthy shield at his belt, his fingers brushing the cool metal. 32 life force units. One temporal stutter activation could buy him seconds. Maybe enough to reach the window. Maybe enough to scream for guards who probably wouldn't arrive in time. But something in the figure's posture, the casual confidence, the lack of immediate threat, stayed his hand. This wasn't an attack. Not yet. Who are you? Leonard asked, his voice steadier than he felt. The hood tilted slightly. Consider us interested parties. Your curse has drawn attention from quarters beyond your comprehension. We offer clarification. At what cost? Everything has cost, Duke. The question is whether you're willing to pay. The figure took another step into the room. Leonard could see now that the dark cloth wasn't fabric at all, but something that shifted and flowed like liquid shadow. Behind the hood, there were no visible features, just deeper darkness. His divine insight skill, still active at minimal drain, whispered warning. This being was connected to the system. Not a guardian, but adjacent. A contractor. A middleman between the mortal realm and the entities that maintained reality. The Watchers, Leonard said, testing the word from his vision. The figure went very still. So you've seen. Interesting. That accelerates matters. What do you want? To determine if you're a problem to be solved, the hooded figure said, or a tool to be used. Leonard's mind raced through options. Fight? Flee? Negotiate? His life force ticked down to 31 units as he maintained divine insight. The temporal stutter waited, a coiled spring of potential energy. The Aegis could block physical attacks, but against something that might not be entirely physical. He made his decision. Sit, Leonard said, gesturing to the chair opposite his desk. Let's discuss terms. The figure paused, then flowed into the chair with that same unnatural grace. Bold. Or foolish. Survival requires both, Leonard replied, taking his own seat. The desk between them felt like the thinnest of barriers. Start with who sent you. That, the hooded figure said, is precisely what we need to establish. And the true conversation began. The hooded figure stood motionless for a heartbeat too long, the silence in the study stretching thin as aged parchment. Leonard's hand hovered near the heavy tome on his desk, fingers brushing against the leather binding. The air smelled of old paper, ink, and the faint metallic tang of his own fear. His heart hammered against his ribs, each beat echoing the warning from the vision, the Watchers are coming. Interested party, the intruder had said. Leonard's mind raced, weighing possibilities. Could this be one of the system guardians, here to correct the anomaly that was his existence? Or something else entirely? The hood concealed everything but the barest hint of a chin, pale in the dim candlelight that flickered across the room's mahogany shelves and scattered scrolls. Who sent you? Leonard asked, his voice steadier than he felt. He kept his posture relaxed, the arrogant Duke's mask slipping into place even as his thoughts screamed danger. 32 units of life force remained, a dwindling reservoir he couldn't afford to waste. The hooded figure didn't answer. Instead, they shifted, a subtle movement that sent Leonard's instincts flaring. Moonlight from the arched window caught the glint of steel as a dagger slid from a hidden sheath. Not just any dagger, its blade gleamed with a sickly purple sheen, droplets of something viscous clinging to the edge. Poison. Leonard's breath caught. This wasn't a conversation, it was an execution. The assassin lunged. Time seemed to fracture. Leonard threw himself sideways, his chair crashing to the floor with a splintering crack. The dagger whistled past his ear, close enough that he felt the displacement of air against his skin. He hit the carpet hard, the impact jarring his bones. Rolling, he came up against a bookshelf, ancient volumes trembling on their perches. Dust motes danced in the candlelight, swirling in the sudden violence. Forlax sends his regards, the assassin hissed, voice raspy and devoid of emotion. They advanced, dagger held low and ready. The poison on the blade seemed to pulse with a faint, malevolent light. Leonard's mind snapped into focus. Duke Forlax, the general aligned with the system's rulers. Of course. The tax levy, the public humiliation, all precursors to this. They weren't waiting 3 months, they were accelerating the timeline. Leonard pushed himself up, back against the shelves. His options flashed through his mind. Temporal stutter could buy him seconds, but at 1 unit per second, it would drain him fast. And against a trained assassin, freezing time briefly might not be enough. He needed something more, something defensive. The Fate-Gacha. The cursed system that had brought him here, that threatened to kill him, was now his only lifeline. How much, he thought desperately, calculating. The assassin closed in, stepped silent on the thick rug. 10 units. 20. He had 32 left. Burning too much could leave him a withered husk, but dying here would end everything. The original plot's execution in 3 months would become a footnote to tonight's murder. He made his decision. As the assassin feinted left and struck right, dagger aiming for his throat, Leonard reached inward, touching that strange reservoir of life force that hummed beneath his skin. He didn't need the physical interface, the system responded to will. He sacrificed 15 units, a reckless, desperate gamble, and pulled. The world shuddered. For a moment, the study wavered, colors bleeding at the edges. Leonard felt the life force tear from him, a cold, draining sensation that left him lightheaded. The Fate-Gacha draw manifested as a brief, blinding flash of light between him and the assassin. Then, failure. Not just any failure, a catastrophic one. The pull yielded, shattered moonlight, a useless fragment of crystallized despair that dissolved into motes of gray dust before it even fully formed. The system's interface, invisible to all but him, flickered with error glyphs, reality itself protesting the absurdity. And then, as it always did, the pity counter triggered. Divine intervention. Golden light erupted from nowhere, so bright it washed out the candles and moonlight alike. It coalesced around Leonard, forming a shimmering, semi-transparent shield that hovered just inches from his skin. Intricate runes glowed across its surface, shifting and rotating like celestial bodies. The aegis of the unworthy. Knowledge flooded Leonard's mind, the shield's properties, its cost, its limitations. It could absorb poison, repel physical attacks, and it was tied directly to his life force. Maintaining it cost 5 units per minute. He had 17 left. The assassin froze, dagger poised mid-strike. Confusion flashed in the shadowed hood. Then they recovered, striking again with brutal efficiency. The poisoned blade slammed into the shield. The impact resonated through the study, a deep, bell-like chime that made the bookshelves tremble. The purple poison on the dagger sizzled and evaporated, drawn into the shield's golden light where it dissolved harmlessly. The assassin staggered back, arm numb from the rebound. Leonard didn't hesitate. He pushed forward, the shield moving with him. He wasn't a fighter, not in this body, not with these memories, but he had momentum now. He slammed the shield into the assassin. The force was immense, amplified by whatever divine mechanics powered the pity drop. The assassin flew backward, crashing into the heavy oak desk. Scrolls and inkpots scattered. The hood fell back, revealing a woman with sharp features, dark hair tied tightly, and eyes wide with shock. She was younger than he'd expected, maybe in her 20s, with a network of faint scars across one cheek. Her gray robes were simple, unadorned, professional assassin's garb. She tried to rise, but Leonard was already on her. He deactivated the shield, the golden light winking out. The cost had drained another 2 units, 15 left now. He could feel the exhaustion setting in, a deep, bone-weary fatigue that made his limbs heavy. Dark circles would be forming under his eyes, he knew, the visible price of his curse. He grabbed a fallen inkpot, heavy, solid brass, and brought it down on her wrist. The dagger clattered to the floor. She cried out, a short, pained gasp, then fell silent, glaring up at him with hatred. Leonard pinned her with a knee to her chest, breathing hard. Sweat dripped from his brow onto the carpet. "Forlac," he said, voice ragged. "Tell me everything." She spat, the gesture weak. "You're dead, Greystone. The general doesn't tolerate anomalies." "Anomalies," Leonard repeated. So Forlac knew about his curse, or at least suspected. The system's rulers were moving faster than he'd anticipated. He pressed the inkpot against her throat, not enough to crush, but enough to promise. "Why now? The execution was supposed to be in 3 months." The assassin laughed, a bitter, hollow sound. "You embarrassed Kale. You're drawing attention. The Guardians are watching. Forlac can't risk you becoming a rallying point." She coughed, blood speckling her lips from the impact with the desk. "He has orders from higher up. Eliminate the flaw before it spreads." Leonard's mind raced. Higher up, the system Guardians. Or the ancient entities behind them. The conspiracy was deeper than he'd imagined. He leaned closer, his voice dropping to a whisper. "Who else is involved? What's the plan?" She shook her head, defiance in her eyes. "Kill me. It doesn't matter. They'll send others. Forlac has marked you. Priority target." Her breath hitched. The tax levy was just a distraction. This was always the endgame. Leonard stood, letting her go. She didn't try to rise, just lay there, watching him with those hate-filled eyes. He retrieved the poisoned dagger, careful not to touch the blade. The purple residue was gone, absorbed by the Aegis, but he wasn't taking chances. He tucked it into his belt, then turned to the window. Dawn was still hours away. The manor was silent, too silent. Where were the guards? Had they been bribed, or eliminated? He looked back at the assassin. "What's your name?" "Does it matter?" she rasped. "It might," he said. "I could use someone who knows how Forlac operates." She laughed again, weaker this time. "You think I betray him? He owns my contract. My life. And if I offered you a better one?" Leonard asked, the idea forming even as he spoke. He had no allies, just enemies and potential threats. This woman, trained, connected, could be valuable. Or she could slit his throat the moment he turned his back. Before she could answer, a noise echoed from the hallway, footsteps, hurried and heavy. Leonard tensed, reaching for his dwindling life force. But it was Jasper, his junior attendant, bursting into the study with a lantern held high. The young man's face was pale, his Greystone livery disheveled. "My lord." Jasper gasped, taking in the scene, the overturned chair, scattered scrolls, the assassin on the floor. "I heard, the guards at the east wing are unconscious. Poisoned darts. I came as fast as I could." Leonard nodded, relief warring with new anxiety. The attack had been coordinated. He turned to the assassin. "Last chance. Name, and what you know." She met his gaze, and for a moment, he saw something besides hatred, calculation, survival instinct. "Lyra," she said finally. "They call me Lyra. And Forlac isn't working alone. He has allies in the capital. Nobles who want the system maintained, who profit from the status quo. You're a threat to all of them. Lyra." Leonard filed the name away. "And the Guardians? Are they directing this?" "I don't know," she admitted, her defiance crumbling into exhaustion. "Forlac takes orders from shadows. But he fears them. He talks about correcting flaws before the Watchers arrive." The Watchers. The warning from the vision. Leonard's curse had drawn attention from forces beyond mortal comprehension, and now mortal enemies were moving to eliminate him preemptively. He had 17 units of life force left, a poisoned dagger, and an assassin at his feet. The plot had accelerated, and the 3-month countdown had just become a ticking bomb. He looked at Jasper. "Secure her. Use the old wine cellar, it's warded. And wake the household. We're not safe tonight." As Jasper moved to obey, Leonard stared out the window at the dark grounds. Duke Forlac, a powerful general aligned with the system's rulers, now saw him as a priority target. The first assassination attempt had failed, but it wouldn't be the last. And somewhere, in the shadows of reality, the system guardians were watching, judging, waiting to correct the anomaly that was Leonard von Greystone. The carriage wheels crunched over the gravel drive of the royal palace, each turn feeling like a grinding stone against Leonard's dwindling reserves. He sat stiffly in the velvet-lined interior, the aegis of the unworthy shield of phantom weight against his chest, a constant reminder of the 17 life force units that remained. Outside, the palace loomed like a gilded cage, its spires piercing the twilight sky, windows ablaze with the warm glow of 1,000 candles. Nobles in extravagant silks and polished armor streamed through the grand archway, their laughter and chatter a discordant symphony of ambition and deceit. Leonard adjusted the silver-trimmed collar of his formal attire, the fabric too tight around his throat. He had dressed in the Greystone colors, deep crimson and black, but the finery felt like a costume for a role he was destined to fail. In the original plot, this ball was where the trash villain made a fool of himself, stumbling through social gaps that solidified his downfall. Now, with Forlax's assassins watching and the system guardian's warning echoing in his mind, every step was a potential trap. He descended from the carriage, the night air cool against his skin. The palace courtyard was a spectacle of opulence. Marble statues of past monarchs stood sentinel, their stone eyes seeming to follow the guests. Servants in livery moved with practiced efficiency, offering crystal goblets of sparkling wine. Leonard accepted one, the liquid bitter on his tongue. He scanned the crowd, his divine insight skill humming faintly in the back of his mind, a low-level awareness that cost nothing but focus. It whispered of hidden agendas, of life forces flickering like distant stars, some bright with power, others dim with decay. Inside the grand ballroom, the air was thick with perfume and politics. Chandeliers hung from vaulted ceilings, their crystals refracting light into rainbows that danced over the polished floor. Musicians played a lively waltz from a raised dais, but the music was drowned out by the murmur of conversations, sharp, calculating words masked by polite smiles. Leonard moved through the throng, nodding at familiar faces he recognized from the council meeting. Duke Alaric of the Western Marches stood near a pillar, his laughter booming as he regaled a group of younger nobles with tales of hunting exploits. Duke Ilara was across the room, her gaze cold and assessing as she sipped from a golden chalice. Whispers trailed in Leonard's wake. He caught fragments as he passed. Strange luck, they say. Heard he survived an attack. Forlax not pleased. The words were like needles, pricking at his composure. He forced a neutral expression, his mind racing. 3 months until execution, less now, the days slipping away like sand through an hourglass. This ball was a battlefield, and every noble was a potential ally or enemy. He approached a cluster of minor nobles, barons and counts whose lands bordered his own. They were outcasts in their own right, their influence waning under the weight of heavier taxes and Forlax's encroaching control. Leonard remembered them from the Bible, potential recruits for a resistance, if he could sway them. He offered a shallow bow, the motion stiff from fatigue. "Good evening," he said, his voice measured. "I trust the harvests in your regions are faring well." One of them, a baron with weary eyes and a threadbare coat, glanced around nervously before replying. "As well as can be, your grace. Though the levies grow heavier each season." His words were cautious, laden with unspoken fear. Leonard nodded, his divine insight revealing the man's desperation, a life force flickering weakly, drained by constant struggle. He considered using his alchemist's fortune skill to offer some insight into trade opportunities, but the cost of 5 life force units was too steep. He had to conserve what little remained. As he conversed, a figure detached from the shadows near the royal dais. It was a man in immaculate court attire, his face sharp and predatory, with eyes that missed nothing. Leonard didn't recognize him from the Bible, but the man's demeanor screamed Forlax's agent. He moved with a serpentine grace, weaving through the crowd until he stood before Leonard, a mocking smile playing on his lips. "Duke Greystone," the man said, his voice smooth as silk. "What a pleasure to see you in such robust health. The rumors of your misfortune have been greatly exaggerated, it seems." Leonard met his gaze, his temporal stutter skill itching at the edges of his consciousness. A brief freeze of time could give him an advantage, but it would drain precious life force. He resisted the urge. "I find that rumors often are," he replied evenly. "And you are?" The man's smile widened. "Lord Silas, of the Eastern Reach. I couldn't help but overhear the talk of your peculiar luck with the Fate-Gacha. Some say it's a curse, others a blessing in disguise. Perhaps you'd care to demonstrate a public pull, to settle the matter." The surrounding nobles fell silent, their attention sharpening. This was a trap, carefully laid. A public failure would humiliate Leonard, undermining any support he might gather. But refusal would mark him as a coward. Leonard's heart hammered against his ribs. He had 17 life force units left, using any for a pull was reckless, but his Pity Breaker's gambit guaranteed a divine intervention reward after a catastrophic failure. It was a gamble, but one he could weaponize. He forced a calm he didn't feel. Very well, Lord Silas. But such demonstrations are not without cost. He raised a hand, the motion drawing every eye in the vicinity. The ballroom seemed to hold its breath. Leonard focused inward, reaching for the Fate-Gacha interface that only he could see, a shimmering panel of arcane symbols hovering in his mind's eye. He selected a pull targeting social influence, a vague category that could yield anything from a worthless trinket to something useful. With a mental command, he sacrificed 5 life force units. The pull activated. A faint glow emanated from his hand, visible to the onlookers as a ripple of distorted air. Then, with a sound like shattering glass, the glow collapsed inward. The result materialized in his palm, a tarnished copper coin, so corroded it was barely recognizable. Laughter erupted from the crowd, sharp and derisive. Lord Silas's smile turned triumphant. A coin fit for a beggar, he sneered. Is this the great luck of House Greystone? But Leonard felt the system shudder. His divine insight flared, showing him the hidden mechanics, the global pity counter, strained by the cosmic weight of his failure, triggering in response. Reality itself seemed to warp around him for a split second, the air growing heavy with unseen power. Then, the pity counter activated, forcing a divine intervention reward. A new skill slotted into his awareness, Charm of the Court. It was an aura-based ability, costing 3 life force units per minute to maintain. When active, it subtly swayed the opinions of those within its range, making them more inclined to view him favorably. Not mind control, just a nudge, a shift in perception. Leonard activated it immediately, feeling the drain as his life force dropped to 9 units. The effect was instantaneous. The laughter died away, replaced by murmurs of curiosity. Lord Silas's triumphant expression faltered, confusion clouding his features. The minor nobles nearby leaned in, their eyes softening with newfound interest. An interesting result, Leonard said, his voice carrying a newfound warmth that seemed to resonate in the air. The system works in mysterious ways. Perhaps this coin is a reminder that true value isn't always in gold. He pocketed the coin, the gesture deliberate. Around him, nods of agreement spread. Conversations resumed, but the tone had shifted, where there had been mockery, now there was cautious respect. He moved through the crowd, the charm of the court aura weaving a fragile web of superficial support. He exchanged pleasantries with a viscountess, offered a sympathetic word to a count struggling with debt, and even shared a brief, non-committal toast with Duke Alara, who regarded him with a speculative glint in her eye. But the victory was hollow. Leonard felt the strain of the aura like a physical weight, his life force ticking down with each passing minute. He kept it active for 10 minutes, draining 30 units in total, a reckless expenditure that left him with only 9 units remaining. The fatigue was profound, a deep ache in his bones that made every movement an effort. He retreated to a secluded balcony, leaning against the stone railing to catch his breath. The night sky was clear, stars glittering like distant diamonds. Below, the palace garden stretched out, shadows pooling beneath ancient oaks. From his vantage point, he spotted Forlax's agents. They were scattered throughout the ballroom, their postures too rigid, their eyes too watchful. One of them, a woman in a dark gown, was speaking quietly into a communication crystal, her gaze fixed on Leonard. They had seen the anomaly, noted the shift in the crowd's demeanor. The attention was dangerous, a beacon drawing the system guardians closer. Leonard's divine insight whispered a warning, the watchers were monitoring, their presence a cold pressure at the edge of his consciousness. The ball dragged on, a torturous parade of music and masked intentions. Leonard moved through the motions, his smile strained, his mind calculating. He had won a reprieve, but at a terrible cost. 9 life force units, enough for perhaps one more minor skill use, or a few minutes of the Aegis shield. He was running on fumes, and Forlax's net was tightening. As the final waltz ended and guests began to depart, Leonard made his way toward the exit. The grand foyer was a chaos of farewells and summoned carriages. He was almost to the doors when a figure brushed past him, a servant in plain livery, their face obscured by the crowd. Something was pressed into his hand, a small, sealed letter on thick parchment. The servant melted away before Leonard could react. He stepped outside into the cool night air, the letter hidden in his palm. Under the flickering torchlight of the carriage drive, he broke the seal. The handwriting was elegant, yet hurried. It read, "Your curse is not unique. There are others who defy the system's chains. Meet at the abandoned clock tower in the old merchant district, 1 hour past midnight. Come alone, if you value your life and the truth. There was no signature, only a symbol etched at the bottom, a stylized eye within a broken circle. The carriage arrived, but Leonard stood frozen, the letter a cold weight in his hand. The invitation was a risk, another potential trap in a world full of them. But it also promised answers, allies, perhaps, or at least knowledge. He glanced back at the palace, its windows darkening as the last guests departed. Forlak's agents were still watching, their shadows lingering in the archway. The system guardians loomed in the unseen realms. And his life force was nearly spent. He climbed into the carriage, the door closing with a soft click. As the vehicle rumbled into motion, he stared at the letter, the words burning in his mind. The clock tower. 1 hour past midnight. A secret meeting with those who defied the system. The night was far from over. The abandoned clock tower loomed against the moonless sky like a skeletal finger pointing accusations at the heavens. Leonard approached with the cautious steps of a man who had learned that even shadows could hold knives. His breath misted in the chill air, each exhale a reminder of the life force dwindling within him. 9 units left, a number that felt more like a death sentence than a resource. The cobblestones beneath his boots were slick with dew, and the scent of damp stone and decay hung heavy around the tower's base. He paused at the entrance, a gaping maw where a door had once been. The letter in his pocket seemed to burn against his thigh, its cryptic invitation now feeling like either salvation or the most elaborate trap yet. He activated his divine insight skill, the familiar tingle spreading through his mind as he scanned the area. The skill revealed nothing overtly dangerous, but it did highlight faint traces of recent magical activity, not the brute force energy of combat spells, but the subtle, intricate patterns of wards and concealment charms. Someone had prepared this meeting place with care. "Show yourself," Leonard called out, his voice echoing in the hollow space beyond the entrance. "I've had enough of games and assassins." A figure emerged from the deeper shadows within the tower. She was tall and lean, dressed in practical travel clothes of dark wool and leather rather than noble finery. Her hair was pulled back in a severe braid, and her face bore the marks of someone who had spent too much time squinting at ancient texts, fine lines around intelligent eyes that now studied him with intense curiosity. In her hands, she held not a weapon, but a small, glowing crystal that cast a soft blue light over the rubble-strewn floor. "Leonard von Greystone," she said, her voice low and measured. "Or should I say, the anomaly that has half the capital whispering and the other half plotting your demise." Leonard kept his distance, his hand resting near where he could quickly activate the aegis of the unworthy if needed. "You sent the letter. Who are you?" "Ilara," she replied, the name spoken with a weight that suggested it should mean something. When he showed no recognition, she gave a small, bitter smile. "Once a scholar of the Royal Archives. Now an exile. My crime was studying what we were never meant to understand, the flaws in the Fate-Gacha system." She took a step forward, and the light from her crystal illuminated more of the tower's interior. Leonard saw that she had set up a makeshift study in one corner, a small table covered in parchment scrolls, ink pots, and what looked like fragments of ancient artifacts. The air here smelled of old paper and ozone. "You believe the system enslaves humanity," Leonard said, recalling the letter's phrasing. "A dramatic claim." "Dramatic, but true," Ilara said, her eyes never leaving his. "For generations, we've accepted that our talents, our very destinies, are determined by random pulls fueled by our life essence. But what if that randomness is engineered? What if the so-called divine rewards are merely corrections to keep us docile and dependent?" Leonard felt a chill that had nothing to do with the damp air. His divine insight skill hummed in the back of his mind, confirming that her words aligned with the vision he'd received, the echoes of the ancients that showed the system guardians as reality maintainers who corrected flaws. But alignment wasn't proof of sincerity. "Why come to me?" he asked. "Because you're living proof of a flaw they can't correct," Ilara said, her voice dropping to a near whisper. "Your curse, this pity-breaker's gambit as you call it, violates their precious balance. When you pull from the Fate-Gacha and trigger those catastrophic failures, you're not just getting divine rewards. You're exposing cracks in the foundation. The Guardians notice. Forlak notices. And there are others like me who have been watching for someone like you." She gestured to the scrolls on her table. "I'm part of a network. Small, scattered, but growing. Scholars, former nobles, even some who've escaped the system's notice through luck or cunning. We believe the Fate-Gacha doesn't just determine our fates, it harvests them." Every pull drains life force, yes, but we suspect it also siphons something else. Potential. Will. The very essence of what makes us more than cattle. Leonard's mind raced. 3 months until execution. 9 units of life force. Assassins in the shadows. A hero hunting anomalies. And now this, a possible ally, or another layer of deception. He needed to know which. Prove it, he said abruptly. Prove you're not another of Forlax's agents, or some new trick by these guardians. Elara raised an eyebrow. How? I'm going to do a Fate-Gacha pull right now, Leonard said, watching her reaction closely. In your presence. If you're lying about wanting to understand the flaws, this should be educational. If you're working for them, well, let's see what happens. A flicker of genuine alarm crossed Elara's face. Here. Now. The energy signature alone could. That's the point, Leonard interrupted. He closed his eyes, reaching inward to the dwindling pool of his life force. 9 units. He couldn't afford to waste any, but he also couldn't afford to trust blindly. He visualized the Fate-Gacha interface, that cursed system that had brought him both ruin and salvation. He focused his intent not on a specific reward, but on information, the truth about Elara, her network, their motives. He sacrificed 2 units of life force. The familiar sensation of draining washed over him, a cold emptiness spreading from his core. The air in the clock tower grew heavy, charged with the energy of the pull. Blue-white tendrils of light began to spiral around him, coalescing into the shimmering portal of the Fate-Gacha interface. Elara took an involuntary step back, her scholarly curiosity warring with instinctive fear. The portal shimmered, then convulsed. Instead of the usual smooth transition, it flickered violently, colors bleeding into each other in nauseating patterns. A low hum built to a shriek that had no business existing in audible frequencies. Leonard's divine insight screamed warnings, reality stress, system overload, anomaly detection thresholds being breached. Then, the catastrophic failure. The portal spat out not an artifact or scroll, but a single, wilted dandelion. It floated for a moment in the charged air, its yellow petals browned at the edges, before drifting to the floor. Utterly mundane. Completely worthless. The epitome of failure. But Leonard felt the familiar shift, the universe itself seeming to stutter in protest. The Pity Breaker's gambit activated. The global pity counter, that hidden mechanism he'd weaponized, triggered in response to a failure so absolute it threatened the system's integrity. Golden light erupted from nowhere and everywhere at once, flooding the clock tower with brilliance that made Elara cry out and shield her eyes. Leonard stood at the center, feeling the divine energy wash over him. It wasn't warm or comforting, it was the cold, precise correction of a broken equation being solved. The light coalesced into a crystalline lens that floated before him, intricate patterns etched into its surface that seemed to shift and change when stared at directly. Knowledge flooded his mind as the divine intervention reward integrated itself. Truthseeker's lens. A skill that, when activated for a minor cost of life force, could reveal hidden motives, concealed truths, and the unspoken intentions behind words and actions. Not mind reading, but something subtler, a way to see through the layers of deception that people, even themselves, built around their true purposes. Leonard opened his eyes. The golden light faded, leaving the clock tower darker than before. His life force now stood at 7 units. The wilted dandelion lay on the floor where it had fallen. And Elara was staring at him with an expression of pure, unadulterated awe mixed with terror. By the forgotten gods, she whispered. You really do break it. Every time. Leonard ignored her for a moment, focusing inward. He activated the newly acquired Truthseeker's lens, sacrificing another half-unit of life force. The world didn't change visually, but Elara, she gained a subtle aura, a shimmer of colors around her that conveyed meaning on an instinctual level. Blue for curiosity. Green for genuine concern. Flickers of orange for fear, not of him, but of what he represented. No red of deception. No black of malice. She was telling the truth. All of it. Your network, Leonard said, letting the skill fade. You said you could help me understand my curse. Elara took a steadying breath, visibly collecting herself. Yes. And more. We've been compiling information for years. There are places in the world where the system's influence is weaker. Ancient sites predating the Fate-Gacha's implementation. One in particular, a hidden dungeon in the Whispering Crags, 3 days' ride from here. Rumors say it holds artifacts from the time before the system, items that can mask anomalies. Shield someone from the Guardian's detection. Leonard's heart quickened. A way to hide from the Watchers. To buy time without constantly looking over his shoulder. You know where this dungeon is? I have maps, Elara said, moving to her table and unrolling a parchment. Copied from forbidden texts. The entrance is concealed by natural formations and old magic. But getting there won't be easy. The crags are treacherous, and the dungeon itself, well, the rumors also speak of guardians of a different sort. Creatures twisted by the system's energy, or perhaps preserved from before it. She traced a route on the map with a finger. We'd need supplies. Discretion. And to move quickly. Every day you remain in the capital, Forlax's net tightens. And now with what just happened here. She gestured at the air where the Fate-Gacha portal had been. The energy spike would have been detectable to anyone monitoring system anomalies. Leonard was about to respond when a sound from outside the clock tower froze them both, the distant but unmistakable clatter of armored movement, too organized to be city guards on patrol. Then voices, carrying on the still night air. Scan the perimeter. The anomaly signature was strongest here. Kale, are you certain this isn't another wild goose chase? The Duke has us running in circles. A familiar voice answered, young and brimming with self-righteous conviction. The system doesn't lie, Marcus. Something violated the balance here. Something big. If it's connected to the rumors about Greystone. Leonard and Elara exchanged a single, urgent look. Kale. Here. Now. With his party, hunting system anomalies, hunting him. Elara moved with sudden efficiency, sweeping her scrolls and artifacts into a leather satchel. The back exit, she hissed. There's a collapsed section of wall that leads to the old sewers. We can lose them in the tunnels. Leonard didn't need to be told twice. He grabbed the map from the table, folding it hastily as he followed Elara deeper into the clock tower's ruins. Behind them, the sounds of Kale's party grew closer, boots on stone, the clink of weapons being readied, the hero's voice giving orders with the confidence of someone who believed destiny was on his side. They reached the back wall where centuries of neglect had opened a jagged hole into darkness. Elara ducked through first, her crystal providing a faint glow. Leonard followed, the rough stone scraping against his shoulders. As he emerged into the foul-smelling darkness of the ancient sewer beyond, he cast one last look back at the clock tower. Through the hole, he saw a torchlight flicker in the main chamber they just vacated. Silhouettes moved against the light, armed figures searching methodically. One silhouette stood taller than the others, a sword strapped to his back. Kale. Then Elara's hand closed on his arm, pulling him deeper into the darkness. They'll find the dandelion, she whispered. And they'll know. Leonard turned away from the light, following her into the dripping blackness. The expedition to the Whispering Crags was no longer a plan for tomorrow. It was a race for survival that had already begun. The Whispering Crags loomed like broken teeth against a bruised sky, 3 days' hard travel from the capital's sewers. Leonard von Greystone trudged through undergrowth that clawed at his noble attire, now stained with mud and torn at the hem. Every step felt heavier than the last, his body protesting the relentless pace Elara had set since dawn. The forest grows restless, Elara murmured, her scholar's robe surprisingly resilient against the thorns. She paused, her eyes scanning the shadows between ancient oaks. System anomalies attract mutated wildlife. The Guardians don't like intruders. Leonard's breath fogged in the chill air. He could feel the weight of his remaining life force, 6.5 units, a number that haunted his every thought. The divine insight skill whispered warnings in his mind, each Fate-Gacha pull risked alerting the system guardians, those ancient entities who viewed his curse as a flaw to be corrected. Yet the dungeon promised artifacts that could mask anomalies, tools essential for surviving Duke Forlax's assassins and the execution fate looming just over 2 months away. They camped that first night in a hollow beneath a lightning-struck pine. Leonard watched Elara kindle a fire with practiced efficiency, her hands steady despite the howls echoing from deeper woods. She was younger than he'd expected, perhaps 30, with sharp features and eyes that held too much knowledge for someone exiled from scholarly circles. "Why risk helping me?" he asked, breaking a silence that had lasted hours. Elara didn't look up from the flames. The dissident network has watched anomalies for decades. Most die within weeks. You've survived assassination, drawn divine intervention rewards, and attracted Forlax's personal attention. That makes you either the greatest threat to the system or our best chance at understanding it. Her words hung between them. Leonard remembered the Truthseeker's lens skill, acquired during their meeting at the clock tower. He'd used it to confirm her honesty, but the memory of that pull still stung. 2 life force units sacrificed for a wilted dandelion before the pity counter forced the skill into existence. Every success born from catastrophic failure. On the second day, the terrain turned treacherous. Ravines cut through the forest floor, their edges crumbling underfoot. Leonard's boots slipped on moss-slick stones, and only a desperate grab at a root prevented a 20-foot drop. His heart hammered against his ribs as he hauled himself back to solid ground, the aegis of the unworthy shield humming faintly at his wrist, inactive but ready, a constant drain he couldn't afford to activate. Conserve your strength, Elara advised when he reached for his water skin. The dungeon's guardians won't care if you're thirsty. She was right, of course. Leonard's divine insight skill provided grim calculations. At his current rate of exertion, he'd need at least 1 unit of life force just to reach the dungeon entrance alive. The charm of the court skill lay dormant in his mind, useless against beasts and terrain. The temporal stutter skill could freeze time briefly, but its cost, unknown without testing, might leave him completely drained. They encountered the first guardian at midday on the 3rd day. It emerged from a thicket not as a beast but as a wrongness in the air, a shimmering distortion that resolved into a wolf with too many joints, its fur matted with crystalline growths that pulsed with faint system energy. Elara froze, her hand going to a dagger at her belt. Mutated by proximity to the dungeon, she whispered. Don't let it touch you. The crystals carry corruption. The creature paced, its multiple eyes fixing on Leonard with unnatural intelligence. He could feel it, a pull, an attraction. His cursed luck was a beacon to things touched by the Fate-Gacha system. Leonard's mind raced. The aegis of the unworthy could repel attacks, but at 5 units per minute, activating it might leave him with barely enough life force to stand. The alchemist's fortune skill offered no combat advantage. He had one option, terrible and necessary. Get behind me, he told Elara. He focused inward, reaching for the Fate-Gacha interface that existed in his perception. The system responded, cold and impersonal, presenting the familiar wheel of possibility. He designated the target, a combat advantage against mutated guardians. The cost glowed in his vision, 3 life force units. 3 units. Nearly half his remaining strength. Elara's eyes widened as she sensed the energy gathering. Leonard, no, the system guardians. They're already watching, he said through gritted teeth. Forlax trying to kill me. Kale's hunting anomalies. I need tools to survive. He committed the pull. The world fractured. Not literally, but in his perception, the forest blurred, colors bleeding into wrong spectrums. The Fate-Gacha will spun with impossible speed, then shuddered to a stop on an image of a shattered sword. The result manifested in reality, a rusted dagger appeared in Leonard's hand, its blade crumbling to dust even as he grasped it. Catastrophic failure. But as the dagger disintegrated, the global pity counter activated. Leonard felt it, a vast, impersonal mechanism grinding into motion, responding to a failure so absolute it violated reality's rules. Energy surged through him, wild and uncontrolled, tearing at his already depleted life force. The divine intervention reward forced its way into existence. Beastbane resonance etched itself into his skill set. The knowledge flooded him, a temporary power that weakened monsters within a 50-foot radius, sapping their strength and coordination. The cost screamed in his mind, 2 life force units per minute of activation. Leonard staggered, the world swimming. His life force plummeted, 6.5 to 3.5 from the pull, then dropping further as Beastbane resonance activated automatically. He could feel it spreading from him in invisible waves, pressing against the mutated wolf. The creature whimpered, its crystalline growths dimming. Its too many legs buckled, and when it tried to lunge, the motion was sluggish, clumsy. Elara didn't hesitate, her dagger flashed, finding a gap in the crystalline armor, and the wolf collapsed with a final shudder. Leonard deactivated Beastbane resonance after 30 seconds. The drain stopped, but the damage was done. He checked his status, 2.5 life force units remaining. Pale, trembling, he leaned against a tree as black spots danced at the edges of his vision. You're burning yourself to ash, Elara said, her voice tight with something that might have been concern or calculation. No choice, he managed. The divine insight skill confirmed it, without the dungeon's artifacts, his anomaly signature would grow until system guardians intervened directly. Forlax assassins would keep coming. The execution date approached with merciless certainty. They reached the dungeon entrance as twilight painted the sky in violets and grays. The entrance wasn't a door but a crack in the mountainside, hidden behind a waterfall whose waters ran clear and cold. The rocks around it bore carvings too worn to decipher, but Leonard's divine insight whispered of ancient hands, of a time before the Fate-Gacha system solidified its grip on reality. Inside, the air changed, dry and still, smelling of dust and ozone. Glowing moss provided faint illumination, revealing a corridor carved from living stone. The walls were smooth, too perfect for mortal tools, and in places they shimmered with residual system energy. Elara produced a map from her robes, its parchment brittle with age. According to dissident records, the dungeon has 3 chambers. The first holds minor relics, tools from before the system's dominance. The second is a trap corridor. The third. She trailed off, her finger tracing a symbol Leonard didn't recognize. The third contains the altar. They moved carefully, Leonard's senses stretched thin. Every shadow seemed to writhe with potential threat. His remaining life force felt like a candle guttering in a strong wind, 2.5 units, barely enough to sustain basic bodily functions, let alone another divine intervention. The first chamber opened before them, a circular space 50 feet across. Shelves lined the walls, and on them rested artifacts, a compass with no needle, a mirror that reflected nothing, a set of scales perfectly balanced despite missing weights. Leonard approached slowly, the alchemist's fortune skill activating automatically, a minor drain he barely registered. The skill whispered values, histories. The compass had once pointed to places outside reality. The mirror showed truths too terrible for most minds. The scales could measure the weight of a soul. Take only what you can carry, Elara advised, already filling a pack with careful selections. The dissident network can study these, learn how they resist system influence. Leonard chose the mirror, its surface cold against his fingers. The alchemist's fortune skill suggested it might be useful against illusions, against lies. He slipped it into his own pack, his movements sluggish with exhaustion. As they turned to leave the chamber, the floor shifted. Not a trap in the conventional sense, the stones themselves rippled like water, and from the disturbance rose guardians. 3 of them, humanoid but wrong, their bodies formed from conglomerate crystal and petrified wood. System energy crackled around them, and they moved with jerky, mechanical purpose, blocking the exit. Leonard's hand went to his wrist, where the aegis of the unworthy waited. Activating it would cost 5 units per minute, more than he possessed. Beastbane resonance required 2 per minute, and he had only 2.5 total. The temporal stutter skill's cost remained unknown, a gamble he couldn't afford. They're drawn to your anomaly signature, Elara said, her dagger ready. The artifacts must have masked the dungeon's energy until we disturbed them. The guardians advanced. Leonard made his choice. He activated Beastbane resonance. The power tore through him, a wildfire consuming the last of his fuel. His life force plummeted, 2.5 to 0.5 in seconds. The weakness was immediate and total, his knees buckled, and only Elara's quick grab kept him from collapsing. But the effect worked. The guardians slowed, their crystalline surfaces clouding. Elara moved among them, her dagger finding seams and weaknesses. She fought with economical precision, no wasted motion, and within a minute all 3 guardians lay shattered on the stone floor. Leonard deactivated the skill. The drain stopped, but he was empty, hollow. 0.5 life force units, enough to keep his heart beating, his lungs drawing air, but little more. He could feel his body trying to shut down, systems failing one by one. You need to rest, Elara said, supporting him as they stumbled into the second chamber. This was the trap corridor, but the traps were dormant, pressure plates that didn't trigger, dart holes that remained silent. Either time had broken them, or the dungeon's energy had faded too far to sustain them. They passed through without incident, Leonard leaning heavily on Elara, each step a monumental effort. The third chamber waited at the corridor's end. It was vast, easily 100 feet across, with a ceiling lost in darkness. In the center stood the altar, a massive structure of polished black stone, carved with runes that glowed with soft blue light. It was unmistakably a Fate-Gacha interface, but unlike any Leonard had seen, larger, more intricate, humming with ancient power. And guarding it was the golem. It rose from a resting position beside the altar, 15 feet of crystalline perfection. Every facet of its body reflected the chamber's faint light, and in its chest glowed a core of pure system energy, brighter, more concentrated than anything Leonard had witnessed. Its eyes opened, twin suns of blue fire fixing on the intruders. Elara froze. That shouldn't be active. The record said the guardians were dormant. The golem took a step forward, the stone floor cracking under its weight. It raised one crystalline hand, and energy gathered around its fingers, a spell forming, deadly and precise. Leonard tried to reach for a skill, any skill, but his body refused to respond. 0.5 life force units. He was a candle at the moment of extinction, a man holding on to consciousness by will alone. The golem's eyes burned brighter, and Leonard knew, with absolute certainty, that it saw him. Not just his physical form, but his curse, his anomaly status, the trail of catastrophic failures and divine interventions that marked his path through this world. It saw him, and it judged him a threat to be eliminated. The crystalline golem's first blow came not as a strike, but as a tremor. Its massive fist, glowing with intricate system runes, slammed into the dungeon floor where Leonard had stood moments before. Stone shattered like glass, sending razor-sharp fragments flying through the chamber. Leonard dove behind a crumbling pillar, his heart hammering against his ribs. Beside him, Elara pressed against the cold stone, her breath coming in ragged gasps. "It's reading your energy signature," she shouted over the grinding of stone. "The altar must have marked you as an anomaly." Leonard risked a glance. The golem stood 15 feet tall, its body composed of interlocking crystal plates that shimmered with the same sickly green light he'd seen in the Fate-Gacha interface. Where its face should have been, 3 glowing orbs pulsed in a triangular pattern, tracking his movements with unnerving precision. Each step it took echoed through the chamber, vibrating up through the soles of his boots. "Conventional attacks won't work," Elara said, drawing a slender dagger from her belt. "That's pure system energy crystallized. My steel might as well be butter." As if to prove her point, the golem swung its arm in a wide arc. The crystalline limb passed through a stone column as though it were mist, leaving behind a perfectly smooth cut. The upper half of the pillar slid sideways with a groan before crashing to the floor in a cloud of dust. Leonard's mind raced. His life force hovered at 0.5 units, barely enough to keep breathing, let alone activate a skill. The beast-bane resonance had drained him to the edge of consciousness, and now this monstrosity wanted to finish the job. "How do we fight something that can phase through solid stone?" he asked, his voice tight. "We don't," Elara said grimly. "We run." But even as she spoke, the golem's 3 eyes flared. A wave of oppressive energy washed over the chamber, pressing down on them like physical weight. Leonard's knees buckled. He caught himself against the pillar, his vision swimming. The air grew thick, heavy with the scent of ozone and something metallic, like blood and lightning mixed together. He could feel the system's attention focused on him, probing, analyzing, judging. "It's sealing the exits," Elara whispered, her eyes wide with horror. Leonard followed her gaze. The chamber's entrance, a massive stone archway they'd entered through, now shimmered with the same green energy that composed the golem. The light coalesced into a solid barrier, trapping them inside with their executioner. Panic clawed at his throat, cold and sharp. This was it, the moment his 3-month countdown might end prematurely, not by noble scheming or the hero's blade, but by a mindless construct of the very system he was trying to cheat. No. The thought cut through the fear. He hadn't survived assassins, political traps, and a near encounter with Kale just to die in some forgotten dungeon. His curse had saved him before. It would have to save him now. "Elara," he said, his voice steadier than he felt. "Buy me 30 seconds. She stared at him. "With what?" "My charming personality. Distract it. Keep it from crushing me while I—" He trailed off, not needing to finish. They both knew what came next. Another pull. Another catastrophic failure. Another divine reward snatched from the jaws of cosmic misfortune. Elara's jaw tightened. She gave a sharp nod, then darted out from behind the pillar. The golem's eyes tracked her instantly. It raised a hand, fingers splayed, and a barrage of crystalline shards materialized in the air around it. They shot toward her like arrows. Elara moved with a dancer's grace, twisting and weaving between the projectiles. One grazed her shoulder, tearing through her cloak and drawing a line of crimson. She didn't slow. Leonard closed his eyes. He didn't need the interface to know what he was about to do. He could feel his life force, that fragile, flickering spark that kept him tethered to this body, to this world. 0.5 units. Barely enough to stand. To pull from the Fate-Gacha, he'd need more. Much more. He reached deeper. There was a reservoir, he'd learned, beneath the surface measure of life force. A well of vitality tied not just to his physical body, but to his soul, to the original Leo who'd been torn from his world and shoved into this doomed noble's skin. The system measured it in neat, clinical units, but Leonard knew it was more than that. It was memory. It was desire. It was the will to survive. He took it all. A searing pain ripped through him, starting in his chest and spreading outward until every nerve screamed. His vision went white. He tasted copper, felt warmth trickle from his nose. Some distant part of him registered that he was burning through life force he couldn't afford to lose, that even if this worked, he might not survive the aftermath. But what choice did he have? Die now to the golem, or die later from exhaustion? He focused his intent. Not a weapon. Not a shield. Something specific. Something to counter a being made of pure system energy. To destabilize it. To crack its perfect, crystalline form. The Fate-Gacha interface flickered into existence before him, translucent and shimmering. It looked different this time, strained, as though struggling to contain what he was about to unleash. The usual array of glowing orbs swirled in their chaotic dance, but their colors were wrong. Too bright. Too violent. They pulsed with a frantic energy that made his teeth ache. He reached out with his mind and pulled. The world shattered. Not metaphorically. Literally. The air around him cracked like glass, spiderweb fractures spreading outward in every direction. For a heartbeat, Leonard saw through the fractures, glimpses of other places, other times. A city of silver spires under a purple sky. A battlefield where giants made of shadow clashed with knights of light. A throne room where a figure in black robes watched him with ancient, knowing eyes. Then the vision collapsed, and the pull resolved. A single, withered leaf drifted from the interface. It was brown and brittle, veined with black rot. As Leonard watched, it crumbled to dust before it even reached the floor. The catastrophic failure triggered instantly. Alarms screamed, not in his ears, but in his soul. The Fate-Gacha interface convulsed, its edges fraying into static. Error messages flashed in languages he didn't recognize, symbols that hurt to look at. The global pity counter, that hidden mechanism he'd learned to exploit, activated with a force that shook the very foundations of reality. Divine intervention, reality fracture. Knowledge flooded his mind, too vast, too alien to fully comprehend. He understood only fragments, a skill that didn't just affect the physical world, but the underlying code of existence itself. A temporary destabilization of system-bound entities. A crack in the fabric of reality that would allow anomalies to slip through. The cost was listed in cold, clinical terms: severe life force drain. Permanent reduction of maximum capacity. Risk of system backlash. Leonard didn't hesitate. He activated it. The pain returned, multiplied 100-fold. It felt like his bones were turning to powder, his blood boiling in his veins. He screamed, but no sound came out, the air had been stolen from his lungs. Green light erupted from his body, not the gentle glow of system energy, but something wild and jagged. It shot out in jagged bolts, striking the crystalline golem. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the golem froze. Its three eyes widened, the pulsing light within them stuttering like a faulty lamp. Cracks appeared on its surface, tiny at first, no larger than hairline fractures. But they spread, multiplying, branching out until the entire construct was veined in black. A sound like breaking glass filled the chamber, rising to a deafening crescendo. Now! Leonard gasped, collapsing to his knees. Ilara didn't need the command. She was already moving. Her dagger flashed, not aimed at the golem's body, but at the largest cluster of cracks spreading from its chest. She drove the blade deep into the fractured crystal, twisted, and pulled. The golem shattered. It didn't explode. It simply came apart, crystalline plates separating and falling to the floor in a rain of glittering shards. The green light within them flickered and died. The oppressive energy vanished, leaving the chamber eerily silent save for Leonard's ragged breathing and the soft patter of falling debris. He lay on his side, curled around the agony in his chest. Every breath was a struggle. His vision swam, darkness creeping in from the edges. He could feel it, the emptiness where his life force should be. Not just depleted, but damaged. Diminished. As though part of him had been torn away and would never return. Leonard. Ilara was at his side, her hands on his shoulders. Stay with me. Don't you dare die here. He tried to speak, but his mouth wouldn't form words. His fingers twitched, brushing against something cold on the floor. A crystal shard, still faintly warm. He focused on that sensation, using it as an anchor to keep from slipping away entirely. "You idiot," Elara muttered, but there was no heat in it. She rummaged through her pack, pulling out a small vial of murky liquid. "This is all I have. A vitality draft. It won't fix the damage, but it might keep you alive." She tipped the vial to his lips. The liquid tasted like mud and herbs, bitter and thick. It burned going down, but a faint warmth spread through his chest. The darkness receded, just enough for him to focus. "Thanks," he managed, his voice a dry rasp. Elara helped him sit up, propping him against what remained of the pillar. Her eyes scanned the chamber, taking in the destruction. The golem was gone, but the altar at the far end still glowed with soft, steady light. The barrier over the entrance had dissipated, leaving the way out clear. "We should loot and leave," she said. "That, whatever you did, it'll have drawn attention." Leonard nodded weakly. Together, they made their way to the altar. It was simpler than he expected, a stone slab carved with runes so old they'd nearly worn away. At its center rested 3 items, a tarnished silver brooch, a scroll sealed with wax, and a cloak folded neatly as though waiting for them. Elara picked up the cloak. It was made of a material that seemed to drink the light, a deep, fathomless gray that shifted subtly when moved. As she unfolded it, Leonard caught glimpses of other colors swirling beneath the surface: midnight blue, forest green, the purple of twilight. "The veil of obscurity," Elara breathed. "It's real." She draped it over Leonard's shoulders. Immediately, he felt a change. The constant, low-level awareness of the system's attention, that feeling of being watched he'd grown accustomed to, faded to a distant whisper. It was like stepping into a quiet room after hours in a noisy crowd. "It masks anomalies from system guardians," Elara explained, her voice hushed with awe. "Wear this, and you'll be invisible to their scans. For a time, at least." Leonard ran a hand over the fabric. It was cool and smooth, lighter than silk. Already, some of the exhaustion seemed to lift, not his life force returning, but the strain of constantly hiding from cosmic scrutiny easing. He took the brooch and scroll, tucking them into his pouch. The brooch was cold against his fingers, the metal etched with a symbol he didn't recognize, a circle intersected by 3 converging lines. The scroll felt ancient, the parchment brittle. He didn't open it, not here, not now. They turned to leave. And the dungeon trembled. It started as a faint vibration, barely noticeable. Then the floor shook, dust raining from the ceiling. A deep, grinding groan echoed through the chamber, coming from the direction of the entrance. Stone shifted, blocks grinding against one another. "What now?" Leonard whispered. Elara's face went pale. She pressed a hand to the wall, feeling the vibrations. "Someone's outside. They're collapsing the entrance." They ran, Leonard leaning heavily on Elara, the veil of obscurity fluttering behind him like a shadow. The corridor leading out was dark, the magical torches that had lit their way in now flickering and dying. Behind them, the sound of falling stone grew louder. A crash, then another. The ceiling ahead cracked, a chunk of rock the size of a carriage breaking loose and slamming down to block their path. They skidded to a halt. Dust filled the air, choking and thick. Through the haze, Leonard saw figures moving beyond the collapsed rubble. Armor glinted in torchlight. A banner, blue and gold, fluttered briefly into view before disappearing behind shifting stone. He recognized that banner. He'd seen it at the royal ball, carried by Kale's attendants. The hero's party had found them. And they'd just sealed the only exit. The dungeon chamber shuddered as dust rained from the ceiling, the sound of collapsing stone echoing through the ancient corridors. Leonard pushed himself up from the cold floor, his body protesting with every movement. The veil of obscurity lay heavy in his hands, a cloak of shifting shadows that seemed to drink the faint light from the chamber's glowing crystals. Elara stood near the altar, her fingers tracing the tarnished silver brooch they'd found, her expression unreadable. "They've sealed us in," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Kale's party must have triggered the entrance collapse. Leonard's mind raced. His life force felt like a dying ember, a faint warmth that threatened to extinguish with every breath. The reality fracture skill had left him hollowed out, as if part of his very essence had been carved away. He could feel the permanent damage, a reduction in his maximum capacity that made the air itself feel heavier to breathe. There must be another way out, he managed, his voice raspy. Pre-system dungeons usually have emergency passages for the builders. Ilara nodded, but her eyes kept darting toward the chamber's entrance. She clutched the ancient scroll they'd found, a document written in a language neither could fully decipher, but whose diagram suggested it detailed the dungeon's original construction. For a moment, Leonard considered using Truthseeker's lens on her, but the thought of burning even a sliver of his remaining life force made him hesitate. She'd been honest before. She'd fought beside him against the golem. They spent what felt like hours searching the chamber's walls, their fingers tracing cold stone for hidden seams. The Fate-Gacha altar at the room's center hummed with residual energy, its surface still glowing faintly from Leonard's catastrophic pull. The crystalline golem lay in shattered pieces around it, its core cracked open like a broken geode. It was when Leonard found the hidden lever, a nearly imperceptible depression behind a carved relief of a three-eyed raven, that the chamber's main entrance exploded inward. Kale stood framed in the doorway, his armor gleaming with enchanted light. Behind him, 3 members of his party fanned out, a mage with hands already weaving spells, a rogue with twin daggers drawn, and a cleric whose holy symbol glowed with purification energy. They moved with the practiced coordination of veterans who had fought together for years. Leonard von Greystone, Kale said, his voice carrying the weight of absolute conviction. Or whatever you truly are. The hero stepped into the chamber, his boots crunching on crystal shards. His eyes swept over the scene, the shattered golem, the glowing altar, the artifacts in their hands. When his gaze landed on the veil of obscurity, his expression hardened. You've been cheating the system, Kale continued, advancing slowly. Drawing power that shouldn't be possible. Creating anomalies that threaten the very fabric of our world. Leonard's grip tightened on the cloak. I'm just trying to survive. Survival through corruption is no survival at all, Kale said, his hand resting on his sword hilt. The system guardians have marked you. Your manipulations have drawn their attention. Surrender the artifacts. Submit to judgment. Perhaps they'll show mercy. Mercy. The word tasted bitter. Leonard remembered the original plot, his execution in 3 months, humiliated and broken. Kale's mercy would be a quicker death, but death nonetheless. He glanced at Ilara, expecting to see her readying her dagger, preparing to fight beside him as she had against the golem. Instead, she took 3 steps backward, toward Kale's party. I'm sorry, Leonard, she said, and her voice broke on the words. I didn't have a choice. The betrayal hit him like a physical blow. He saw it now, the slight tremble in her hands that he'd mistaken for exhaustion, the way her eyes kept avoiding his after they defeated the golem. Truthseeker's lens would have revealed it, but he'd been too weak, too trusting. Ilara has been feeding us information since you left the capital, Kale said, not unkindly. She came to us when she realized what you were, a flaw in the system. A danger to everyone. You said you believed the system enslaves humanity, Leonard whispered, looking only at Ilara now. You said you wanted to break its chains. I do, she cried, genuine anguish in her voice. But you're not breaking chains, Leonard. You're unraveling reality itself. Every time you use that curse of yours, you create ripples. The system guardians aren't just maintainers, they're preventers of cosmic collapse. And you're bringing us all closer to the edge. She met his eyes finally, tears streaking through the dust on her face. I joined the dissidents to free people, not to watch the world unmade. When Kale found me, he showed me records. Ancient texts. Your kind of anomaly has happened before. Entire regions wiped from existence when the system tried to rebalance itself. Kale nodded. The western wastes weren't always barren, Leonard. 3 centuries ago, a man with abilities like yours triggered a system correction. The land there still bleeds raw magic. Nothing grows. Nothing lives. Leonard's mind reeled. Was that true? Or was it propaganda from the system's enforcers? He had no way to know, no divine insight to spare, no life force to burn for verification. Surrender, Kale said again, drawing his sword. The blade gleamed with holy light, a weapon designed to sever connections to illicit power sources. This doesn't have to end in violence. But Leonard saw the truth in the hero's stance, in the way his party members positioned themselves to cut off every escape route. Kale might believe he was offering mercy, but his orders were clear: capture or eliminate the anomaly. Trapped. Betrayed. Dying already from life force depletion. Leonard's fingers brushed the Fate-Gacha altar beside him. The stone felt warm, humming with the memory of his last catastrophic pull. He had one option left, the same desperate gamble that had saved him before, but at a cost he might not survive. Don't. Ilara shouted, recognizing his intent. Leonard, please. He ignored her. Closing his eyes, he reached deep into the dwindling spark of his life force. Not just a portion, all of it. Every last ember of vitality that kept his heart beating, his lungs drawing air. He poured it into the altar, targeting not combat, not defense, but escape. Pure, simple removal from this place. The pull was instantaneous. The altar flared with blinding light, and in his hands appeared not a weapon or artifact, but a single, perfectly formed snowflake that melted before it touched his skin. Catastrophic failure. Then the world screamed. The Pity Breaker's gambit triggered, not as a gentle intervention this time, but as a violent correction. The air above the altar tore open, reality itself ripping like parchment. A swirling vortex of impossible colors yawned into existence, a spatial rift, unstable and wild, pulling everything toward it with gravitational force. Leonard felt his life force expenditure like a sword through his soul. It wasn't just depletion, it was eradication. Years of potential lifespan, burned away in seconds. His hair turned white at the temples. His skin grew paper-thin, veins standing out blue and fragile. He aged a decade in a heartbeat. Stop him. Kale shouted, but the spatial rift's pull was already dragging them all toward it. The mage cast a grounding spell, anchoring the party to the floor. Ilara grabbed onto a crystal outcrop, her face a mask of horror. Only Leonard moved toward the rift willingly, the veil of obscurity still clutched in one hand. He met Ilara's eyes one last time as the vortex swallowed him. She mouthed something, an apology, or perhaps a warning, but the sound was lost in the roar of tearing reality. Then darkness. Consciousness returned in fragments. First came pain, a deep, bone-aching agony that permeated every cell. Then cold, damp chill seeping through thin blankets. Finally, sound, the distant cluck of chickens, the murmur of voices, the crackle of a fire. Leonard opened eyes that felt gummed shut. He lay in a narrow bed in a small room with rough-hewn wooden walls. Sunlight filtered through a single dirty window, illuminating dust motes dancing in the air. The veil of obscurity lay folded at the foot of the bed, its shadow still shifting slowly even in daylight. He tried to sit up. His body refused, muscles trembling with the effort. A cough racked him, dry and painful, and when it subsided, he tasted blood. The door creaked open. An old woman entered, her face lined with years of hard living. She carried a wooden bowl steaming with broth. "You're awake," she said, her voice raspy but kind. "Been 3 days. We found you in the field outside town, half dead and covered in frost. Never seen a man appear out of thin air before. 3 days. The spatial rift had dumped him here, wherever here was." He managed a nod, too weak to speak. The woman helped him drink the broth, spoonful by spoonful. Each swallow was an effort, but warmth spread through his hollowed-out frame. As she tended to him, Leonard took stock. His life force was gone. Not just low, absent. The well was dry, the bucket shattered. He could feel the permanent damage from reality fracture like cracks in his soul, and the massive expenditure for the spatial rift had burned through whatever reserves remained. He was running on borrowed time now, a clock ticking down with no way to wind it back. "Where?" He managed, the word scraping his throat. "Redfield Village," the woman said. "Edge of the Eastern Reach, near the border with the unclaimed lands. You're lucky we found you. Wolves would have had you otherwise." She left him to rest. Leonard lay staring at the ceiling, piecing together his situation. The veil of obscurity had likely masked his arrival from immediate system guardian detection, but it wouldn't last forever. Kale knew he'd escaped. Ilara would tell them everything, the artifacts, the dungeon, his abilities. And Forlac. Always Forlac. On the 4th day, he managed to sit up. On the 5th, he shuffled to the window. Redfield Village was exactly what it sounded like, a cluster of maybe 24 buildings surrounded by fields, nestled in a valley between forested hills. Poor. Isolated. Perfect for hiding, if he'd had any strength left. On the 6th day, he heard the rumors. They came from the village tavern, carried by a traveling merchant who stopped to water his horses. Leonard sat in a shadowed corner, wrapped in a veil of obscurity despite the day's warmth, listening. Mobilizing troops, the merchant was saying to the tavern keeper. General Forlac himself. Posted notices in every town from here to the capital. Looking for some noble who broke the system. The keeper poured ale. Broke the system? What does that even mean? Dunno exactly. But the notices say he's dangerous. Anomaly class. Reward for information is enough gold to buy a manor house. The merchant lowered his voice, but Leonard's hearing, sharpened by desperation, caught every word. They're saying he can twist fate itself. Make the gacha give him whatever he wants. Cheater, the keeper grunted. Maybe. But 4 lakh doesn't mobilize for cheaters. He's bringing battle mages. Siege equipment. Like he's going to war against a kingdom, not hunting one man. Leonard slipped out before they noticed him. Back in his room, he unfolded the veil of obscurity, studying its shifting patterns. It had saved him so far, masking the anomaly of his presence. But 4 lakh wasn't relying on system detection, he was using old-fashioned manhunt tactics. Notices. Rewards. Troops sweeping the region. He was a wanted man now. Not just by the system's guardians, not just by Kale's righteous crusade, but by the military might of a general who saw him as a threat to the established order. Leonard looked at his reflection in the room's tin mirror. The face staring back was gaunt, aged prematurely, with white streaks in hair that had been dark weeks before. Eyes that had once held the arrogance of a duke now held only exhaustion and grim calculation. He had escaped the dungeon. Escaped Kale. Escaped immediate execution. But as he listened to the distant sound of the merchant's wagon rolling out of town, carrying rumors to the next village, and the next, Leonard von Greystone understood the truth. He had traded a trap of stone for a trap of territory. And the hunter had just begun his pursuit in earnest. The morning light filtered through the cracks of the thatched roof, casting thin golden stripes across Leonard's weathered hands. He stared at them, the skin now creased and spotted like parchment left too long in the sun. 3 weeks had passed since the spatial rift deposited him in Redfield Village, and each day brought only marginal improvement. The old woman, Mara, he'd learned her name was, had nursed him with bitter herbal concoctions and silent, suspicious care. Leonard pushed himself up on the straw mattress, his joints protesting with sharp pains. The reality fracture and spatial rift expenditures had done more than drain his life force, they'd carved years from his body. Where once he moved with ducal grace, now he shuffled like a man twice his age. His reflection in the tin wash basin showed hollow cheeks, silver threading through what remained of his dark hair, and eyes that held too much knowledge of systems breaking. "You shouldn't be up yet," Mara said from the doorway, her voice like gravel shifting. She carried a wooden bowl of thin broth. "The nobles' men are asking questions at the mill. Looking for someone who doesn't belong." Leonard accepted the bowl, his hands trembling slightly. "What do they offer for information?" "A year's grain. Enough to survive the winter." Mara's eyes narrowed. "Some would sell their mothers for that." He sipped the broth, tasting poverty in every swallow. Redfield Village was a collection of 23 huts clinging to rocky soil, populated by farmers whose Fate-Gacha pulls had yielded nothing but blighted crops and broken tools. They wore their failures like second skins, stooped shoulders, empty eyes, hands that knew only disappointment. That afternoon, Leonard ventured outside for the first time. The village square was little more than a dirt clearing where chickens pecked at stones. Children with too thin limbs watched him from behind their mothers' skirts. A man named Tomas, whose right arm ended at the elbow, lost it to a pull that promised metalworking mastery, he'd explained bitterly, approached. "They say you're the one 4 lakh wants," Tomas said, his voice low. "The system breaker." Leonard leaned against the village well, the stone cool against his palm. "What do you know of 4 lakh? "Enough to know he takes what he wants. Last season, his tax collectors came through. Took half our harvest for the system maintenance fee. My cousin protested. They made him do a public pull as punishment." Tomas's jaw tightened. He got a cursed seed that grew thorns through his lungs. Died screaming. Others gathered as they spoke, a woman named Alara, not the betrayer, but a village elder with the same unfortunate name, whose daughter had vanished after a pull promised transportation magic, a young man called Finn, blind in one eye from a failed alchemical draw, a dozen more, each with scars visible and invisible. They were the refuse of the Fate-Gacha system, people whose life force expenditures had yielded only ruin. "Why would a duke care about us?" Alara the elder asked, her voice skeptical. "You nobles play your games with our lives as tokens." Leonard met her gaze. "Because 4 lakh isn't just collecting taxes. He's harvesting something else. The system's rulers, the ones who maintain this whole brutal machine, they're planning something. And people like us, the failures, we're either collateral or fuel. He told them then, haltingly at first, then with growing clarity. Not everything, not his transmigration, not the exact nature of his curse, but enough. The pity system. The divine interventions. How catastrophic failure could be weaponized. How the very thing that marked them as worthless might be turned against their oppressors. Finn, the half-blind youth, stepped forward. Prove it. Murmurs rippled through the gathering. Leonard felt the weight of their desperation, their need to believe in something beyond the next failed pull. He looked at his hands again, at the life force that flowed thin and weak through his veins. The veil of obscurity artifact lay hidden beneath his tunic, its subtle magic masking his anomaly signature from System Guardians. But it wouldn't hide him from Forlak's mortal scouts forever. Tomorrow, Leonard said. At dawn. I'll show you what failure can buy. That night, he examined his remaining resources. The veil of obscurity. The tarnished silver brooch from the dungeon, which his divine insight skill revealed as a minor luck charm for agricultural pulls, useless for combat. The ancient scroll, its text faded but containing fragmented knowledge of system mechanics. And his skills, divine insight, temporal stutter, alchemist's fortune, charm of the court, truthseeker's lens, beast-bane resonance, reality fracture, spatial rift. Most required life force he no longer possessed in meaningful quantities. Mara found him studying the scroll by candlelight. You'll kill yourself if you pull again, she said flatly. I've seen what happens when men with little life force left try the gacha. They become husks. I have to, Leonard replied. Faith is a currency here. And right now, I'm bankrupt. Dawn came gray and cold. The entire village, all 87 souls, gathered at the eastern edge of the settlement where a small shrine to forgotten gods stood crumbling. Leonard stood before them, the morning wind tugging at his threadbare clothes. He could feel the residual life force within him, a faint trickle where once a river had flowed. Maybe enough for one catastrophic failure. Maybe not. What are you aiming for? Tomas asked, his expression grim. Anything that helps us fight, Leonard said. Weapons. Armor. Combat skills. He closed his eyes and reached for the Fate-Gacha interface. It manifested as a shimmering, fractured pane of light visible only to him, cracked from his previous abuses, but still functional. The cost display flickered, 0.8 life force units remaining. Maximum capacity permanently reduced to 3 units from the original 10. Using divine insight, he could see the global pity counter hovering at 99.7%. One more catastrophic failure would trigger it. Leonard focused his intent, protection for the vulnerable. Empowerment for the weak. He channeled 0.5 units, more than half his remaining vitality, into the pull. The interface screamed. Not metaphorically. An actual, ear-splitting shriek of rending reality tore from the shimmering pane. Cracks spiderwebbed across its surface, glowing with malevolent purple light. The villagers stumbled back, hands over their ears. Leonard felt the life force tear from him, a sensation like having his soul unraveled thread by thread. The failure manifested as a single, perfectly spherical drop of water that hung in the air before him. It reflected the gray sky, then darkened to black, then evaporated with a hiss that smelled of ozone and despair. And then the pity counter hit 100%. The world held its breath. The wind died. Birds fell silent mid-flight, hanging motionless in the air. From the fractured interface, golden light erupted, not the harsh glare of system energy, but something warmer, older. It coalesced into shimmering script that burned itself into Leonard's vision. Divine intervention, empowerment of the downtrodden. Effect, temporarily enhances physical and mystical abilities of designated allies within 100-foot radius. Strength, speed, and skill efficacy increased by approximately 300%. Duration, 15 minutes per activation. Cost, 0.3 life force units per minute of sustained effect, ***. Warning, excessive use may accelerate life force depletion beyond recovery thresholds. Leonard gasped as knowledge flooded him, not just the skill's mechanics, but its essence. This wasn't a combat buff. It was recognition. The system acknowledging that those marked as failures still held value. That their very brokenness could become strength. He opened his eyes. The villagers stared, their expressions shifting from fear to awe. Golden motes of light drifted down like benevolent snow, settling on their shoulders, their hands, the tools they carried. Finn, Leonard said, his voice rough. Throw that stone. The half-blind youth picked up a fist-sized rock from the ground. He hurled it toward a dead tree 50 feet away. Instead of the weak toss Leonard expected, the stone shot like a catapult projectile, smashing through the trunk with a crack that echoed across the valley. Elara the Elder reached for her walking stick, and found she no longer needed it. She stood straight for the first time in years, the chronic pain in her joints vanished. Tomas flexed his remaining hand, and the muscles corded with strength he hadn't possessed since youth. This is what failure buys, Leonard said, though the effort of maintaining the buff was already draining him. 0.3 units per minute. He had maybe 2 minutes before he'd need to release it. Not just for me. For all of you. When we pull from the gacha, we risk everything for scraps. But when the system breaks, it has to pay. And we can make it pay together. He let the buff fade. The golden motes dissipated. But the change in the villager's posture remained. Shoulders that had been slumped now squared. Eyes that had been downcast now met his with something kindling in their depths. Over the next 7 days, Leonard organized them. Not as a proper army, they had no armor, few proper weapons, but as a militia. Using his alchemist's fortune skill, he identified which of their meager possessions held hidden value. Tomas's grandfather's plowshare contained trace amounts of star iron that could hold an edge, Finn's collection of river stones included 3 that resonated with minor earth magic, even Mara's herb-drying rack was made from wood that subtly repelled insects. They trained at dawn and dusk. Leonard taught them what he remembered of basic combat, not the flashy techniques of fantasy heroes, but dirty, practical fighting. How to use farming tools as weapons. How to ambush. How to disappear into the landscape. He used empowerment of the downtrodden in short bursts, never more than 30 seconds at a time, conserving his dwindling life force. Each activation left him weaker, the silver in his hair spreading, new lines etching themselves around his eyes. On the 8th day, the scout returned. Her name was Kira, a wiry woman with scars across her forearms from a failed beast-taming pull. She'd been watching the roads, moving with the silence of those who've learned to be invisible. She found Leonard inspecting the village's makeshift barricades, sharpened stakes driven into the earth at the village approaches. 4 lakhs moving, Kira said, her breath coming in quick pants. Not just scouts. Regular troops. 50, maybe more. Heavy infantry. They fortified the old watchtower at Black Ridge Outpost, halfway between here and the capital. Leonard stilled. How long? They're gathering supplies. Conscripting locals. I heard one of the sergeants talking, they plan to sweep the eastern reach clean. Round up every system anomaly and failed pull-4 processing. They're calling it the Purge. Tomas, who had been sharpening a scythe blade, looked up. When? 2 weeks, Kira said. Maybe less if they get the siege engines they're waiting for. Leonard looked at the villagers training in the fading light. Finn practicing with his earth stones, making small tremors in the soil. Elara the Elder directing children to stockpile food in hidden caches. Mara brewing more of her bitter medicines, now with added focus on wound treatments. They were brave. They were determined. And they were hopelessly outmatched. Black Ridge Outpost, Leonard mused. Mountain Pass approach. Defensible position. You're not thinking of attacking? Tomas said, incredulous. No, Leonard replied. But Forlak isn't just gathering forces to hunt scattered refugees. He's creating a choke point. If he controls Blackridge, he controls movement through the eastern reach. Anyone trying to organize resistance would have to go through him. He met their eyes, one by one. He knows we're here. Not exactly where, but that there's something brewing. The purge isn't just about rounding up anomalies. It's about eliminating the possibility of what we represent before it spreads. Kira nodded grimly. There's more. The scout I overheard said Forlak's bringing specialists. People who can track system disturbances. They'll find us eventually. Leonard's hand went to the veil of obscurity beneath his tunic. How long would it hold against dedicated hunters? The artifact masked anomalies, but it didn't make him invisible. And every use of his skills, every divine intervention, left traces in the system's fabric. We need to move, he said. Not scatter. Together. There are other villages like this one. Other failures. If Forlak is planning a sweep, there'll be targets too. And go where? Mara asked, her practical nature surfacing. We can't fight 50 trained soldiers. We don't have to fight them all, Leonard said. Just the right ones. At the right time. He thought of the pity counter. 100% again after the empowerment pull. It would reset now, build slowly with minor failures until another catastrophic one triggered it. But he could force that. Could sacrifice more life force, call down another divine intervention. Something bigger. Something that could level the playing field. The cost would be terrible. He could feel the emptiness inside him, the places where life force should flow but didn't. Another major expenditure might leave him a true husk, or kill him outright. But as he looked at Finn's determined expression, at Tomas's scarred arm, at the children hiding food for a siege they didn't understand, he knew the calculation had already been made. Gather everyone, Leonard said. We leave at first light. North, toward the Whispering Crags. There are caves there, old mining tunnels. Places to hide while we find others like us. And then? Kira asked. Then we show Forlac what happens when the downtrodden stop being downtrodden. That night, as Leonard prepared what little he owned for travel, Kira returned from one final scouting run. Her face was pale in the moonlight. They're not waiting 2 weeks, she whispered. Forlac's vanguard is already on the move. Light cavalry. They'll be here in 3 days. She handed him a crumpled piece of parchment she'd taken from a dead courier's pouch. Leonard smoothed it out, using a faint glow from his divine insight to read the flowing script. By order of General Forlac, Supreme Commander of Eastern Reach Operations *. All resources are to be allocated for the containment and elimination of the system anomaly designated breaker. Civilian casualties are authorized. Settlement destruction permitted. The anomaly is known to consort with failed pull outcasts and may attempt to rally them. Crush any gathering before it coalesces into meaningful resistance ***. Primary target, Black Ridge Outpost. All forces converge there by week's end for final purification strike ***. Leonard stared at the words. Final purification strike. Not just hunting him. Not just rounding up anomalies. Forlac meant to burn the entire region clean. And he was telling them exactly where he'd be. It's a trap, Tomas said when Leonard showed him the orders. He wants you to come to Blackridge. Of course it is, Leonard replied. But sometimes, the only way out of a trap is through it. He looked north, toward the mountains where Blackridge Outpost perched like a stone vulture. 3 days until Forlac's cavalry arrived here. A week until all forces gathered at the outpost. Enough time to gather more outcasts. Enough time to prepare one catastrophic, beautiful failure. Enough time to make the system pay what it owed. Leonard von Greystone, once Duke, now fugitive, breaker of systems, smiled, a thin, grim expression that held no joy, only resolve. The pieces were moving. The board was set. And for the first time since he'd awakened in this cursed world, he wasn't just surviving. He was building something worth defending. The morning mist clung to the eastern reach hills like a shroud of grey wool, dampening the sounds of 50 pairs of feet moving through rocky terrain. Leonard von Greystone walked at the head of the column, each step a conscious effort against the weight that had settled in his bones. His hands, once smooth and aristocratic, now showed veins like blue rivers beneath parchment-thin skin. The villagers turned militia followed in ragged formation, Tomas with his makeshift hook where an arm should be, Finn squinting through his one good eye, Kira moving with the silent grace of a scout who knew these hills better than her own heartbeat. Leonard's breath came in shallow puffs, visible in the chill air. He could feel the emptiness where his life force should have been, a hollow ache that pulsed with every heartbeat. 3 units maximum capacity, the system whispered in his mind through the divine insight skill he'd acquired months ago. 3 units, and he had burned through most of it already. The remaining 0.3 units felt like the last embers in a dying fire. We'll reach the northern pass by dusk, Kira said, materializing beside him without sound. Her leathers were stained with mud and something darker, patrol blood from yesterday's skirmish. Forlac's scouts are thicker here. They know we're coming. Leonard nodded, the motion making his neck ache. Let them know. I want Forlac looking this way. For 7 days they had marched through terrain that chewed at boots and spirits alike. The hills rose in jagged waves of grey stone and stubborn pine, the paths between them narrow enough that 2 men could barely walk abreast. Leonard had chosen this route deliberately, it offered cover from aerial observation, and the rock formations provided natural choke points for ambushes. Each night, as the militia huddled around meager fires, he would study the veil of obscurity artifact they'd taken from the dungeon. The cloak lay folded in his pack, its fabric seeming to drink the firelight rather than reflect it. It masked anomalies from system guardians, but would it hide 50 souls from Forlax searchers? On the third day, they'd encountered their first patrol, 6 of Forlax's men in polished steel breastplates emblazoned with the general's crest, a clenched fist crushing a gotcha orb. Leonard had watched from a ridge as Tomas led the ambush, using the empowerment of the downtrodden skill Leonard had gifted them. For 3 terrifying minutes, the villagers moved with preternatural speed and strength, their rusty farming tools becoming deadly weapons. The skill cost him 0.9 life force units, 3 minutes at 0.3 per minute, leaving him gasping on the ground afterward, his vision swimming with black spots. "You're killing yourself," Mara had said that night, her hands gentle as she applied a poultice to the new age lines that had appeared around his eyes. The village healer had become his shadow, monitoring the physical toll of his curse. "It's the only currency I have," Leonard had whispered back, his voice raspy. "And I need to spend it before Forlax collects his debt." Now, on the 8th morning, the terrain began to change. The hills grew steeper, the pine giving way to sheer rock faces that rose like the walls of a natural fortress. According to Kira's scouting, Black Ridge Outpost lay beyond the next ridge, a week's march as promised, but the final approach would be through a valley that offered no cover at all. "Caravan," Finn hissed from his position ahead, his half-blind eye somehow still sharper than most men's too. "Coming up the western trail. 6 wagons, maybe 20 guards." Leonard signaled for the column to halt. They crouched behind a tumble of boulders that had fallen from the cliffs above centuries ago. Peering through a narrow gap, he could see the caravan winding its way along the trail below, heavy wagons pulled by oxen, their wheels crunching on gravel. The guards wore Forlax colors, but their formation was sloppy, relaxed. They didn't expect trouble this close to their own outpost. "Supplies for the purge," Kira murmured. "Food, weapons, maybe siege equipment." Leonard's mind worked through the angles. A direct assault on Blackridge was suicide. Forlax would have fortified the position, prepared traps, concentrated his best troops. But this was an opportunity. Capture the supplies, deny them to Forlax, maybe gain intelligence about the outpost's defenses. And more importantly, test a theory. "Prepare an ambush at the narrowest point," he ordered, his voice carrying the authority of the duke he once was. "Tomas, take 20 to block the rear. Kira, archers on the high rocks. The rest with me." As the militia moved into position with a discipline that surprised even Leonard, he found a secluded spot behind a larger boulder. The rock was cold against his back as he slid down to sit on the ground. Closing his eyes, he reached inward, toward that hollow place where his life force should have been. The Fate-Gacha interface shimmered into existence before his mind's eye, a complex lattice of glowing lines and rotating orbs that represented the brutal system governing this world. He could feel it pulling at him, hungry for what little vitality remained. One pull. That's all it would take. One catastrophic failure, and the pity counter would trigger something useful. But what to aim for? Not escape, they needed to win this fight. Not defense, they had the element of surprise. What they needed was advantage. Knowledge. A way to turn this ambush into more than just a skirmish. He focused his intention, tactical superiority. Understanding of enemy weaknesses. A key to unraveling Forlax's preparations. Then he pushed. The sensation was like having his soul ripped through a sieve. The 0.3 life force units, all that remained, flowed out of him in a torrent of agony. His body convulsed, back arching against the rock as the system consumed his vitality. In his mind's eye, the gotcha orb he'd mentally pulled turned black, then cracked, then dissolved into ash that blew away on a non-existent wind. Catastrophic failure. The system shuddered. Reality itself seemed to stutter for a heartbeat, the way it had back in the dungeon when he'd used reality fracture. Colors bled at the edges of his vision. The air grew thick, charged with something that made the hair on his arms stand up even through his aged skin. Then came the pity drop. Not with fanfare or light, but with a sudden, profound knowing that settled into his mind like a stone sinking through water. Tactical omniscience, the system's name for it, appeared in his consciousness alongside the skill's parameters. For 30 seconds, he would see the world not as it was, but as it could be broken. Weak points in armor. Flaws in formations. Structural vulnerabilities in the wagons themselves. The cost, 0.2 life force units to activate, draining him to a mere 0.1 remaining. He didn't hesitate. Activating the skill felt like having his skull cracked open and filled with ice. The world shifted, colors bleeding into a monochrome blue except for points of brilliant, glaring red. The caravan guards below, their armor showed red patches at the joints, at the base of the neck, places where a well-placed arrow or blade would slip through. The wagons themselves glowed with red lines along their axles, at the points where the cargo was secured. One wagon in particular burned so brightly it hurt to look at, explosives, or alchemical supplies. Change of plan, Leonard gasped, stumbling out from behind the boulder. His movements were sluggish, each step requiring conscious effort as if he were moving through deep water. The third wagon, concentrate fire there first. Arrows to the neck joints of their armor. Tomas, when you charge, aim low, their greaves are weak at the ankles. The militia looked at him, then at each other. But they had seen what his curse could do. They had felt the empowerment of the downtrodden coursing through their veins. They trusted the system breaker. When the caravan entered the kill zone, the ambush unfolded with brutal efficiency. Kira's archers, positioned exactly where Leonard had indicated, sent a volley of arrows into the neck joints of the lead guards. 3 men went down without a sound, hands clutching at shafts that had found the narrow gaps between helm and breastplate. Tomas's group charged not at the center of the formation, but at the ankles of the rear guard, their blades, guided by Leonard's shouted instructions, slipped under greaves to sever tendons. Men screamed and fell. Leonard watched from his position, leaning heavily against the boulder for support. The tactical omniscience showed him everything, the panic spreading through the caravan guards as their formation collapsed, the exact moment when one of the drivers considered turning his wagon to block the path, the hidden crossbowman in the 4th wagon who was even now taking aim at Kira's position. "Kira, left," he shouted, his voice raw. The scout dove sideways as a crossbow bolt embedded itself in the rock where her head had been. One of her archers returned fire, the arrow finding the crossbowman's eye through a narrow gap in the wagon's sideboards. Then came the explosion. The 3rd wagon, hit by a flaming arrow exactly where Leonard had indicated, erupted in a fireball that painted the canyon walls orange and black. The concussion knocked men off their feet, sent debris raining down. When the smoke cleared, the remaining guards threw down their weapons. The fight had lasted less than 2 minutes. Leonard slid down the boulder to sit on the ground, his body trembling with exhaustion. The tactical omniscience had faded, leaving behind a headache that pulsed behind his eyes in time with his heartbeat. He could feel the emptiness inside, 0.1 life force units remaining. The number glowed in his mind's eye, a mocking reminder of how close he was to the edge. "We lost 2, Tomas reported, his face grim. "Finn took an arrow in the shoulder, but he'll live." "The wagons." He shook his head in wonder. "Food, weapons, armor. And documents." Kira approached, holding a leather-bound ledger. "Supply manifests," she said, her eyes scanning the pages. "But also, deployment orders. Forlac has 300 men at Blackridge. Ballisti on the walls. A contingent of mages who specialize in anti-teleportation wards." She looked up, her expression troubled. "He's expecting you to try another spatial rift." Leonard managed a weak smile. "He's learning." They spent the rest of the day sorting through the captured supplies and tending to wounds. Leonard moved among them, his steps slow and deliberate. The physical aging had accelerated, his hair, once dark, now showed streaks of silver at the temples. His hands shook when he tried to lift a water skin. Mara shadowed him, forcing him to drink bitter teas she claimed would anchor his spirit, whatever that meant. As dusk painted the sky in shades of purple and gold, they crested the final ridge before Blackridge Outpost. The valley spread out below them, a bowl of shadow already filling with night. And there, at the far end, rising from the valley floor like a stone fist, stood the outpost. Blackridge was larger than Leonard had imagined, not just a watchtower, but a proper fortress with walls 20 feet high, reinforced with magical sigils that glowed faintly in the gathering dark. Torches moved along the battlements, marking the positions of sentries. Ballisti, just as the documents had indicated, were mounted at regular intervals, their heavy bolts like iron fingers pointing at the valley approach. But it wasn't the fortifications that made Leonard's breath catch in his throat. On the highest section of the wall, standing between 2 braziers that cast his silhouette in flickering orange light, stood a figure in ornate armor. Even at this distance, Leonard recognized the bearing, the way the man stood as if the world should bend around him. General Forlac. And Forlac was looking directly at him. Not at the militia, not at the valley approach, but straight at the ridge where Leonard stood. The distance should have made recognition impossible, but Leonard could feel the weight of that gaze like a physical pressure. Cold fury radiated from the man, so palpable it seemed to chill the air around them. Forlac raised one hand, not in greeting, but in a gesture that was unmistakably a promise, a slow, deliberate motion of a finger drawing across his own throat. Then he turned and disappeared into the fortress, leaving behind only the dancing torchlight and the certain knowledge that every trap, every soldier, every ounce of Forlac's considerable power was now focused on one target. The system breaker had arrived. And the general was waiting. The air over Blackridge outpost tasted of iron and impending rain. Leonard von Greystone crouched behind a jagged outcrop, his breath coming in shallow, ragged gasps that scraped against his aged lungs. At 30 paces behind him, the militia waited, Tomas with his single good arm gripping a salvaged spear, Finn squinting through his half-blindness, Kira poised like a coiled spring. They were 20 souls in total, farmers and failed gacha users turned soldiers by desperation and Leonard's fleeting divine buffs. Leonard's body felt like parchment stretched over brittle bones. The 0.1 life force units remaining in his system pulsed weakly, a dying ember in a cavern of exhaustion. Every movement cost him, even lifting his head to survey the outpost's stone walls sent tremors through his limbs. The fortress loomed ahead, a brutal construct of dark granite that clawed at the grey sky. Arrow slits glared like malevolent eyes, and atop the battlements, he could make out the silhouettes of crossbowmen, Forlac's enforcers, waiting. Now, Leonard whispered, the word barely audible. Kira raised a horn to her lips and blew a single, piercing note. From the tree line to the east, a dozen militiamen charged the main gates, shouting and brandishing torches. They moved with the enhanced speed Leonard's empowerment of the downtrodden had granted them hours earlier, a temporary boon that had already faded but left residual agility. Crossbow bolts hissed through the air, thudding into shields and earth. Shouts echoed from the walls as defenders scrambled to repel the diversion. Leonard didn't wait to see more. He slipped from cover, his movements slow and deliberate, each step a negotiation with his failing body. The hidden tunnel entrance was exactly where the captured intelligence documents had indicated, a collapsed drainage grate half buried in thorny brush at the base of the western slope. Tomas and Finn heaved the rusted iron aside, revealing a yawning black maw that exhaled damp, foul air. "We'll hold here, my lord," Tomas said, his voice tight. The man's amputated arm stump was wrapped in rough cloth, but he stood straight, defiance in his eyes. "Give them hell." Leonard nodded, unable to muster words. He dropped into the tunnel, landing in ankle-deep sludge that reeked of decay. The darkness was absolute, broken only by the faint glow of a luminescent moss he'd identified earlier with Alchemist's fortune, a weak, bluish light that revealed slime-slick walls and the skeletal remains of rodents. He activated divine insight, the skill flaring in his mind like a struck match. The system's rules shimmered before him, asterisk tunnel integrity, 87%. Guard patrol patterns, irregular. Life force critical, 0.1/3 units. Warning, expenditure may induce systemic collapse, asterisk. He pushed forward, his boots sucking at the muck. The tunnel narrowed, forcing him to crouch, his back scraping against rough-hewn stone. Every 10 paces, he paused, listening. The sounds of the diversionary attack were muffled here, distant thunder. Closer, he heard the drip of water, the scuttle of insects, and once, the distinct click of a mechanism. Leonard froze. Divine insight highlighted a pressure plate ahead, nearly invisible beneath the sludge. He edged around it, his heart hammering against his ribs. The strain of maintaining the skill was already draining him, he felt a cold sweat break out across his brow. He deactivated it, plunging back into near darkness save for the moss's feeble glow. After what felt like an eternity, the tunnel began to ascend. A faint light filtered down from above, a grate. Leonard climbed a crude ladder, his muscles screaming. At the top, he peered through the iron bars into a dimly lit storeroom stacked with crates and barrels. 2 guards stood with their backs to him, chatting in low tones. "Says the Duke wants the system breaker alive if possible," one muttered. "Wants to study the flaw. Rather put a bolt through his eye," the other grunted. "Freak of nature." Leonard waited, counting breaths. When they moved to inspect a far crate, he lifted the grate, slowly, agonizingly, and slipped into the room. He used temporal stutter, the skill activating with a gut-wrenching pull on his life force. The world around him froze, the guards becoming statues mid-step. He had 3 seconds. He crossed the room, his body moving through molasses, and slipped through a half-open door into a corridor beyond. As the stutter ended, a wave of dizziness hit him. His life force dipped, 0.08 out of 3. He leaned against the wall, gasping, black spots dancing in his vision. The corridor led to a courtyard open to the sky. Rain had begun to fall, a fine, cold drizzle that slicked the cobblestones. The courtyard was a killing ground, high walls on all sides, barred gates at either end. And in the center, waiting, stood 3 of Forlak's champions. They were not human. Divine insight flickered on, revealing their nature, system-enhanced enforcers, class, Purgation Knights. Modifications, reinforced skeletal structure, toxin-resistant bloodstream, neural link to Forlak's command network, they wore polished black plate armor etched with glowing runes, and each held a weapon that hummed with contained energy, a greatsword, a spiked mace, a whip of crackling lightning. The knight with the greatsword stepped forward. Leonard von Greystone, he intoned, his voice metallic and devoid of inflection. By order of General Forlak, you are designated an anomaly. Surrender for study, or be purged. Leonard's mind raced. He was cornered. The militia's diversion would only buy minutes. His body was failing, his life force a flickering candle. He had one path left, the same cursed path that had defined his existence in this world. He reached inward, to the dwindling spark of his vitality. The Fate-Gacha interface manifested in his mind's eye, a shimmering wheel of possibilities. He focused his intent, combat. Survival. Overwhelming force, with a mental command, he burned it all, every last shred of his remaining life force. The 0.08 units vanished in a searing rush of agony. The draw was catastrophic, as he knew it would be. The wheel spun into a blur, then shattered. The interface cracked, reality warping around him. The air in the courtyard thickened, charged with ozone. The Purgation Knights hesitated, their runes flickering erratically. Then the pity counter triggered. A voice, ancient and vast, echoed in the void, divine intervention, avatar of retribution. Above Leonard, the rain parted. A figure coalesced from light and shadow, a spectral warrior 20 feet tall, clad in ethereal armor that shone with a cold, silver radiance. It held a blade of pure energy that hummed with a frequency that made the cobblestones vibrate. The avatar's eyes were voids of stars, and when it moved, it left afterimages of divine wrath. It did not speak. It simply acted. The greatsword knight charged. The avatar's blade descended, an arc of light that passed through armor, flesh, and bone without resistance. The knight dissolved into motes of ash. The mace wielder swung, the avatar caught the weapon in one hand and crushed it to dust, then backhanded the knight into the wall with a crunch of shattered stone. The lightning whip knight lashed out, but the avatar absorbed the energy, its form blazing brighter, before unleashing a concentrated beam that vaporized the knight where he stood. The entire engagement lasted less than 10 seconds. As the last knight fell, the avatar turned its starry gaze to Leonard. It nodded once, a gesture of grim acknowledgement, then faded, dissipating into the rain. The cost hit Leonard like a physical blow. He collapsed to his knees, retching. His life force was gone, truly gone. The meter in his mind read 0/3, but the damage was deeper. He felt hollowed out, his veins burning with phantom fire. His skin, already aged and papery, tightened further, and new lines etched themselves around his eyes and mouth. He coughed, and a speck of blood dotted the cobblestones. The system warning screamed, life force depletion critical. Physical systems degrading. Estimated time to systemic failure, unknown, But the courtyard was clear. The barred gate ahead led to the command center. Leonard forced himself to stand, using the wall for support. Each step was torment, but he staggered forward, through the gate, into a wide hall lined with banners bearing Forlak's crest, a clenched fist crushing a gacha orb. At the hall's end, doors of reinforced oak stood open. Beyond lay Forlak's command center, a room dominated by a massive tactical table, maps pinned with markers, and glowing orbs that displayed real-time feeds of the battle outside. And there, waiting, was General Forlak. The general was a mountain of a man, his armor black and ornate, decorated with trophies from 100 campaigns. His face was a mask of cold fury, but his eyes held a calculating intelligence. In his hand, he held a blade that glowed with a sickly green light, a system-enhanced weapon, humming with power. Forlak's gaze fixed on Leonard, taking in his frail form, his labored breathing, the blood on his lips. He did not smile. He simply raised the blade, pointing it directly at Leonard's heart. Leonard von Greystone, Forlak said, his voice a low rumble that filled the room. You are a cancer. A flaw in the system's design. Your very existence threatens the balance we have maintained for millennia. Outside, alarms began to blare, a rising, urgent wail. The outpost's defenses, dormant until now, activated with a series of heavy thuds and the whine of charging energy. The walls themselves seemed to come alive, runes flaring to life along the stone. Forlac took a step forward, his blade's glow intensifying. And like any cancer, he continued, his eyes never leaving Leonard's, you must be purged. The command chamber of Blackridge Outpost was a cavernous space carved from dark granite, lit by flickering system orbs that cast long, dancing shadows. General Forlac stood at its center, his armor gleaming with the cold light of Fate-Gacha enhancements, intricate silver filigree pulsed with blue energy across his chest plate, and his greatsword hummed with restrained power. Leonard von Greystone faced him, his own body trembling with exhaustion. Every breath felt like drawing glass through his lungs, and his vision swam with dark spots. The avatar of retribution had dissipated moments before, leaving only the lingering scent of ozone and the charred remains of the Purgation Knights. So this is the anomaly, Forlac's voice echoed, deep and resonant. He didn't shout, he didn't need to. The chamber amplified his words. A duke who should have been executed months ago, now crawling through my outpost like a rat. Leonard forced himself to straighten, though his knees threatened to buckle. He could feel his life force at absolute zero, not just depleted, but inverted, as if his very existence was being borrowed against time. His hands were wrinkled and spotted, the skin paper thin. You're the one hunting people for failing your system's lottery, he managed, his voice raspy. Who's the rat? Forlac's lips twisted into a smile that didn't reach his eyes. The Guardians maintain balance. The Fate-Gacha is order. You are chaos. A flaw. He raised his sword, the blade shimmering with geometric patterns of light. Your little trick, this, Pity Breaker's gambit, it's not cleverness. It's desperation. The system compensates for your failures because you are too broken to function within it. Leonard's mind raced. Divine insight flickered at the edge of his consciousness, feeding him fragments. Forlac's enhancements were defensive, layered shields, kinetic dampeners, reality anchors. The general was a fortress. But Leonard had nothing left. Temporal stutter required life force he didn't have. Alchemist's fortune was useless here. His inventory was empty of artifacts. All he had was the curse itself. Let's see how your pity holds up against purpose, Forlac said, and moved. He was faster than anything Leonard had faced. The air cracked as Forlac crossed the distance in a blur, his greatsword sweeping in a horizontal arc. Leonard barely dodged, stumbling backward as the blade carved a glowing trench in the stone floor. The impact sent vibrations through the chamber, dislodging dust from the ceiling. Leonard's heart hammered against his ribs, each beat a painful reminder of his dwindling time. Forlac pressed the attack, his movements economical and brutal. Each swing was calculated to corner, to overwhelm. Leonard parried with the aegis of the unworthy shield, but the force of the blows rattled his bones. The shield absorbed the kinetic energy, its surface glowing dull red, but Leonard could feel the strain. It was designed for assassins' poisons and glancing strikes, not this sustained assault. A backhanded swing caught him on the shoulder, and he heard something crack. White-hot pain lanced through his arm, and he staggered, vision blurring. You rely on luck, Forlac taunted, circling him. On the system's mercy. But there is no mercy in order. Only function. He thrust forward, and Leonard barely twisted aside, the blade grazing his side and tearing through his tunic. Blood welled, warm and sticky. Leonard's thoughts were a frantic scramble. He couldn't win this through skill. Forlac was a product of the system, enhanced by countless successful pulls, his techniques honed over decades. Leonard was a reincarnated office worker in a failing body, surviving on cosmic glitches. He backed toward the chamber's edge, his breath coming in ragged gasps. The outpost's defenses were fully active now. He could hear the distant sounds of combat as his militia fought outside, the screams and clashes echoing through stone corridors. Your villagers will die, Forlac said, as if reading his thoughts. The purge will cleanse this region of anomalies. Starting with you. Leonard's hand went to his chest, where his life force should have been. There was nothing there, just a hollow, aching void. But the Pity Breaker's gambit didn't require reserves. It required sacrifice. He remembered the system's rules, seared into his mind by divine insight. Catastrophic failure triggered the global pity counter. And he had one thing left to sacrifice. You talk about balance, Leonard spat, blood flecking his lips. But your system is built on suffering. Those villagers, They lost everything to bad pulls. You call that order? Forlak's expression didn't change. Sacrifices are necessary. The Guardians see the larger pattern. He raised his sword for a finishing blow, the blade gathering light like a star. Your defiance ends here. Leonard made his decision. He didn't have life force to burn, but he had something else, the last dregs of his existence, the fraying threads of his soul. He focused on the Fate-Gacha interface, that ever-present overlay in his vision, and initiated a pull. Not for a skill, not for an item, but for annihilation. He targeted Forlak, the outpost, the entire twisted structure of control, and offered everything he had left. The system resisted. Warnings flashed, insufficient life force. Critical existence threshold breach. But Leonard pushed, pouring his will into the pull, his consciousness fraying at the edges. He felt something tear inside him, a metaphysical rupture that went deeper than flesh. The pull activated. For a heartbeat, nothing happened. Then the chamber shuddered. Cracks spiderwebbed across the walls, and the system orbs flickered and died. Forlak paused, his sword lowering slightly, confusion flickering in his eyes. What? The failure was not subtle. It was apocalyptic. Reality itself seemed to scream, a soundless, tearing vibration that shook the foundations of the outpost. The air thickened, pressing down like a physical weight. Leonard collapsed to his knees, blood streaming from his nose and ears. He could feel his body unraveling, cells breaking down, time accelerating around him. His hair turned white and brittle, his skin parchment dry. This was beyond depletion, this was erasure. And then the pity counter triggered. Light erupted from Leonard, not from him, but through him, as if he were a conduit for something vast and angry. It was blinding, pure white shot through with gold and violet, and it filled the chamber in an instant. Forlak had time to raise his sword in a defensive stance, his enhancements flaring to life, layers of shields materializing around him. But the light didn't care. It washed over him, and his defenses shattered like glass. The great sword melted, flowing like liquid metal. Forlak's armor disintegrated, and he screamed, a raw, agonized sound that was cut short as the light consumed him, reducing him to ash and motes of fading energy. The light didn't stop. It burst through the chamber walls, through the outpost's fortifications, expanding in a wave of divine wrath. Stone vaporized. Metal flowed like water. Leonard, at the epicenter, was spared the direct force, but the backlash was immense. He felt his bones crack, his organs failing. The world dissolved into pain and brilliance. He saw glimpses, the outpost's towers crumbling, Forlak's forces scattering in panic, his own militia members diving for cover as the shockwave passed over them. The light climbed into the sky, a column of retribution that painted the clouds in hues of judgment. Then, as suddenly as it began, it was over. The light faded, leaving behind a crater where Blackridge Outpost had stood. Leonard lay in the ruins, half buried in debris. He couldn't move. He could barely breathe. Each inhalation was a shallow, wet rasp. His body was a ruin, broken, aged beyond recognition, held together by the last stubborn threads of his will. The divine retribution had cost him everything. He had no life force, no strength, barely a heartbeat. Darkness encroached at the edges of his vision, promising oblivion. He stared up at the sky, now clear and cold above the devastation. Smoke drifted in lazy tendrils. Distantly, he could hear shouts, his militia, calling his name. But they sounded miles away. He tried to lift a hand, and couldn't. This was it. He'd won. He'd defeated Forlak, exposed the conspiracy, rewritten his fate. And he was going to die here, in the dirt. Then the air above him shimmered. A portal tore open, not with light, but with absence, a rift of pure black that drank the surrounding illumination. From it echoed a voice, deep and resonant, vibrating through the ruins. The demon lord has taken notice. Leonard's blood went cold, colder than it already was. The voice was not human. It carried weight, age, malice. Your defiance ends now. Shadowy figures descended from the portal, silhouetted against the void. They moved with unnatural grace, their forms shifting and indistinct, trailing tendrils of darkness. They landed around Leonard, encircling him. He couldn't make out their features, only the impression of eyes glowing with malevolent intelligence. One leaned close, and he felt a chill that had nothing to do with his broken body. The last thing he saw was a clawed hand reaching for him, before darkness claimed him completely. Leonard von Greystone stirred to the taste of blood and dust. His body screamed with every shallow breath, a symphony of broken bones and failing organs. Through blurred vision, he saw the smoking ruins of Blackridge outposts stretching around him like a shattered ribcage against the dawn sky. The divine retribution had carved a crater half a mile wide, leaving only jagged stone teeth where walls once stood. Hands gripped his shoulders, calloused, trembling hands that dragged him across broken ground. He recognized Tomas's weathered face, the man's single arm straining as he pulled Leonard's limp form. Finn stumbled beside them, his half-blind eyes wide with panic as he scanned the skies. Kira moved ahead, her scout's instincts keeping them low against the rubble. "We have to move," Tomas grunted, his voice raw. "The portal's gone, but they'll be coming." Leonard tried to speak, but only a wet cough emerged. He felt the veil of obscurity artifact humming against his chest where he'd tucked it after looting Forlax's chambers, a simple amulet of tarnished silver that now pulsed with faint warmth, masking their presence from whatever senses the shadowy figures possessed. It wouldn't last. Already he could feel its power waning like a dying ember. They reached a collapsed section of outer wall where the militia survivors huddled. Only 8 remained from the 20 who'd followed him here. Mara knelt beside an older woman Leonard recognized as the village elder from Redfield, both tending to a youth with a bleeding leg. The others watched the skies with weapons ready, their faces pale beneath grime and blood. "Duke," Mara whispered as Leonard was propped against stone. Her hands moved over his body, assessing damage with a healer's practice touch. "Your life force, it's gone. Completely." Leonard knew. He could feel the emptiness where vitality should have been, a cold, hollow ache that went deeper than any wound. His skin had taken on a papery texture, hair gone stark white at the temples. When he lifted a hand, he saw the blue veins standing stark against translucent flesh, the subtle tremor of approaching systemic failure. 3 months until execution. He'd be lucky to survive 3 days without life force. "Forlax," he managed to rasp. "Dust," Tomas said grimly. "Nothing left but his blade, and even that's half melted." The general's system-enhanced sword lay nearby, its once gleaming surface now blackened and twisted. Leonard remembered the man's final words, "Cancer to be purged," and felt no triumph, only exhaustion. He'd rewritten his fate, yes. Escaped the trash villain's execution. But at what cost? Kira scrambled down from a vantage point. Movement to the north. Not the shadow things, regular troops. Forlax's reinforcements must have been closer than we thought. Leonard's mind, fogged with pain, clawed for solutions. His inventory flashed through his awareness, divine insight useless now, temporal stutter requiring life force he didn't have, the avatar of retribution expended. But there, the escape artifact. He'd looted it from Forlax's personal quarters during the infiltration, a palm-sized crystal sphere etched with spatial runes. A one-use teleportation device keyed to neutral territories, according to the appraisal he'd done with Alchemist's Fortune before the assault. "My pack," he whispered. Finn fetched it, hands shaking as he opened the leather satchel. Leonard's fingers, clumsy with deterioration, closed around the sphere. It felt warm, almost alive, pulsing in time with his fading heartbeat. "This will take us, somewhere safe," he said, each word an effort. "But it needs activation energy." Mara understood first. Her eyes widened. "You have no life force left to give." "I have, the dregs." Leonard closed his eyes, reaching inward. Life force wasn't just a resource, it was existence itself. The last embers of what made him Leonard von Greystone, the transmigrated soul clinging to this borrowed body. He could feel them, faint sparks in the darkness, the final moments before true death. "No," Tomas said, gripping his shoulder. "There has to be another way." "There isn't." Leonard opened his eyes, meeting each of their gazes. The militia who'd followed him, outcasts, villagers, people with nothing left to lose. They'd believed in his cursed luck, his ability to turn failure into divine intervention. Now he had to deliver one last time. "When I activate it, grab hold. All of you." He focused on the sphere, pouring not life force but something deeper, the residual will of a man who cheated fate itself. The crystal grew hot in his hands, runes blazing with golden light. Pain erupted through him, white-hot and consuming, as the artifact began drawing from the very core of his being. The world blurred. Stone and sky melted into streaks of color. He heard Mara's sharp inhale, felt Tomas's grip tighten, saw Finn's terrified expression frozen in the moment before. Transition. It wasn't like the spatial rift skill he'd used before. That had been clean, precise. This was being torn apart and reassembled, every cell screaming in protest. Leonard's consciousness fragmented, memories flashing, his first terrible gotcha pull yielding a rock, the ball where assassins came for him, Forlak's throat-slitting gesture from the outpost walls. Then stillness. Cool stone beneath him. The scent of pine and damp earth. Distant birdsong. Leonard opened his eyes to a forest clearing surrounded by ancient trees whose trunks were wider than houses. Morning light filtered through a canopy so thick it turned the air green gold. His surviving allies lay scattered around him, groaning as they pushed themselves up. 8 of them. All here. Mara was first to his side. You're alive. Barely. His voice was a ghost of itself. The teleportation had burned the last of whatever he'd used to fuel it, not life force, but something more fundamental. He could feel the systemic degradation slowing, no longer accelerating toward immediate death, but stabilized at the brink. A man balanced on a knife's edge. Tomas helped him sit up against a moss-covered stone. Where are we? Leonard's divine insight skill flickered, weakened but still functional without life force cost, one of its passive aspects. Information flowed into his mind, the Whispering Woods. Neutral territory between 3 kingdoms. No system-aligned factions hold sway here. Ancient wards prevent large-scale magical detection. Safe. For now. Over the next hours, they established a crude camp. Finn and Kira scouted the perimeter, returning with news of a freshwater stream and edible roots. The elder woman, Elara, Leonard remembered her name was, used her knowledge of herbs to prepare poultices for their wounds. Mara tended to Leonard with quiet efficiency, but her expression grew graver with each examination. Your body isn't healing, she told him as dusk approached. Without life force, it can't regenerate. You'll remain like this, fragile, easily broken. Leonard nodded, watching firelight dance across his translucent hands. He'd escaped execution, defeated Forlak, exposed the conspiracy. He was no longer the doomed trash villain of the original plot. To these outcasts, he'd become something else, a fugitive hero, the man who'd wielded divine retribution against the system's enforcers. But heroes in stories didn't linger on the brink of death, their bodies failing by inches. Days blurred into a week of slow recovery. Leonard's strength returned in minute increments, enough to walk short distances, to hold a conversation without coughing blood. The militia built a semi-permanent shelter against a cliff face, using skills honed from hard lives to trap game and purify water. At night, they talked around the fire, voices low. What happens now? Finn asked one evening, his good eye fixed on Leonard. They'll come for us, Kira said. Forlak was just one general. The system has others. More than that. Leonard stared into the flames, remembering the portal, the shadowy figures, the voice that had announced the demon lord's attention. The pity drop. Divine retribution was too big. It didn't just kill Forlak, it sent ripples through reality itself. The ancient entities who maintain the system, the guardians, they felt it. And the demon lord. Silence fell, broken only by the crackle of burning wood. Why would the demon lord care? Tomas asked. Because I break things, Leonard said softly. The Fate-Gacha system, the balance of power, the very rules of this world. To forces that thrive on order and control, I'm not just a threat, I'm an impossibility that needs erasing. On the 8th day, Leonard felt strong enough to walk to the stream alone. He knelt by the water's edge, studying his reflection. The face that stared back was both familiar and alien, Leonard von Greystone's features, but aged decades beyond their years, hair gone fully white, eyes sunken in sockets dark with exhaustion. Yet there was a sharpness there that hadn't existed before. The arrogance of the original Duke had been burned away, replaced by the calculating focus of a survivor who turned cosmic failure into weapon. He activated divine insight, directing it not outward but inward. The skill revealed his status in glowing text only he could see. Name * Leonard von Greystone. Life force *0/3 units, depleted. Physical state * systemic degradation, stabilized at critical threshold. Fate alignment * villain execution plot avoided, current designation, system breaker. Active threats * system guardians, aware, demon lord, alerted, noble factions, hostile. Time until original execution * not applicable, fate rewritten. So he'd done it. Survived the 3-month deadline. The trash villain's destiny was broken. But in its place stood something far more dangerous, a target painted across dimensions. Returning to camp, Leonard found the others gathered around a map Tomas had sketched on cured hide, a rough approximation of the continent based on their collective knowledge. The eastern reach where they'd fought Forlac was a smudge in the southeast. The Whispering Woods occupied a central band of unclaimed territory. To the north, the Demon Lord's domains sprawled like a bloodstain. "We need to understand what we're facing," Leonard said, joining them. "The system isn't just a gacha mechanic, it's control. The Guardians maintain it, the nobles exploit it, and anyone who threatens it becomes an enemy to all of them." "What about the hero?" Mara asked. "Kale, and his party." Leonard's mouth tightened. In the original plot, Kale would have been preparing for his own confrontation with Forlac about now, gathering allies and divine blessings. But with Forlac dead by Leonard's hand, that thread was cut. The hero's path would change, his attention likely turning toward the system breaker, causing ripples across fate itself. "He'll come eventually," Leonard said. "But we have bigger problems first." As if summoned by his words, a figure emerged from the trees. The militia reacted instantly, weapons drawn, forming a protective circle around Leonard. But the newcomer made no hostile moves. He was a messenger by his attire, travel-stained leathers and a cloak the color of dust. His face was ordinary, forgettable, but his eyes held the weary knowledge of someone who'd carried too many ill tidings. "Leonard von Greystone," the messenger said, voice neutral. "I bear news from the northern watchposts." "Speak," Leonard said, though every instinct warned him to prepare for the worst. The messenger's gaze swept over the ragged group, the makeshift camp, finally settling on Leonard's deteriorated form. "The Demon Lord's legions are mobilizing. Not the usual border skirmishes, full mobilization. 20,000 strong, maybe more. They're calling it a cleansing campaign." "Against whom?" Tomas demanded. The messenger's eyes locked with Leonard's. "Against the anomaly. The one who breaks systems. They're whispering a title in the taverns and shadow markets." He paused, and the forest seemed to hold its breath. "The system breaker. And they say the Demon Lord himself has vowed to eradicate this flaw in reality before it unravels everything." Silence. Even the birds had stopped singing. Leonard felt the weight of those words settle over him, heavier than any physical burden. He'd escaped execution, rewritten his fate, survived against impossible odds. But in doing so, he'd drawn the gaze of something far older and more terrible than any noble rival or system enforcer. The messenger bowed slightly. "My task is done. I suggest you keep moving. They have seers." He melted back into the trees, leaving them with the news hanging in the air like a death sentence. Leonard turned back to the map, his eyes tracing the distance between their location and the Demon Lord's domains. Not far enough. Nowhere would be far enough. Finn broke the quiet. "What do we do?" Leonard's hand, pale and trembling, rested on the map. His fingers brushed the ink lines representing kingdoms, forests, mountains, a world that had tried to kill him since the moment he'd awakened in it. A world whose very rules he'd broken. "We survive," he said, and the words felt like a vow. "We find others like us, people the system has broken or discarded. We learn why the Fate-Gacha exists, who the Guardians really are, what the Demon Lord fears about anomalies." He looked at each of them, these outcasts who'd followed him to ruin and back. "And when they come for us, we make them regret ever noticing our existence." Firelight cast their shadows large against the cliff face, dancing like giants ready for war. Somewhere to the north, legions gathered. Somewhere in the spaces between realities, ancient entities watched. And Leonard von Greystone, the man who turned catastrophic failure into divine intervention, stood at the center of it all, broken, depleted, but unyielding. The game had changed. The stakes had risen. And the true battle for survival was only beginning.